Good evening, everyone. I'll call the Council of the Whole meeting of February 4th, 2019 to order at, I guess it's about 6:05. Sorry for the delay. We would like to acknowledge that we are meeting on the shared traditional lands of the Coast Salish people tonight and are mindful of that. I look for approval of the agenda. Councillor Kobayashi, Councillor Parkinson second. All in favor? All against? Done. Adoption of the minutes of the Committee of the Whole of January 21st, 2019. Councillor Day. Councillor Jensen second. And now we go to, all in favor? Thank you. Now we go to public participation. I would advise that on the budget matters, we will allow questions after the presentation of each piece of the budget. So you can either speak now or wait till then and ask questions or make comments. So anybody wish to say anything right now? Seeing none. Council initiatives. So as I think we've done once before this committee, this is an opportunity for members of council to raise discussion on initiative items they would like to have considered in the upcoming financial plan. Are there any? Councillor Parkinson?
Perhaps taking a different interpretation than you. I just thought I would notify the rest of council I'll be out of town for the rest of the week, so I understand I'll be missing a couple of things and apologize for that, but I've prearranged that, so I won't be around for the rest of the week.
Thank you. Oh, sorry. Councillor Kobayashi.
One initiative that I'm keenly interested in pursuing is, I'm not going to use the word cost cutting. I'm going to use the term cost realignment. I think that it behooves all of us right now because, you know, we're a lot of new members here on council, and it's a matter of we've got a status quo. I'm hoping I'm going to explain this properly here. We have a status quo, and I have no idea. I've been trying to benchmark other municipalities in the area as far as, you know, the cost of services in each of the municipalities and what they're getting for it. And I know that there's been things done in the past, I believe, where they looked at some initiatives to make things better, and I've seen several examples of it right now in some of the things that they're doing in the budget, and I think they're all absolutely awesome at what we're doing. I've learned a lot, actually, going through the financial plan. But the question I have to ask is, well, I think that may be required is like to have a select committee that really looks at all this right now, how we do business, because the bottom line is that we're spending taxpayers' dollars. And are we getting a bang for the buck? You know, what's the benchmark? You know, are we? I can't really answer that question. Right now, I see some initiatives happening, but are we really looking at everything and how we're doing business right now? So I hope I'm explaining this so that everyone's clear on what I think needs to be done right now is that, you know, let's prove it to the taxpayers that, yes, you are getting a bang for your buck right now. And we can go from there. Like, that's the benchmark. But right now, there are a lot of initiatives that are happening, but I don't get that whole picture. And so I'd like to see a formation, and I'd even write the terms of reference for it. Just to look at how we conduct business and how we operate. Are we properly aligned to what our objectives are? I can't really answer that question. So a select committee with citizens on it, I think is warranted. Anyways, that's my comments.
I would suggest then, Councillor Kobayashi, so we can actually discuss that, it might be worth bringing forward a written terms of reference, as you say, that can then be put to committee of the whole. And if you could do that with a plan of how you would see implementing that as far as possible at this point. Does that work?
Absolutely, I will do that.
Great, thank you. Councillor Parkinson.
If I could just maybe support that concept with the notion that keeps rattling around in my head. We have been talking at this table recently about the sustainable infrastructure replacement plan and the costs to that. And I think, to me, that sort of gives a guideline of a lot of the costs in the city to compare to. You know, what's more important? You know, is it more important to do this or to fund that thing for the long term? And it's been useful for me to think of things in that comparison. I wouldn't want the cost realignment work to not also consider the possible revenue realignment. I remain convinced that a large portion of our city is tied up in federal and provincial lands, and I'm not as convinced that they're paying their share.
Thank you, Councillor Parkinson. Anybody else to speak at this juncture? Then we have a matter of old business, 6.1, strategic priorities. This item was referred from the January 7th, 2019 committee, and it's now had resourcing added to it, which is something the committee members asked for, and I actually would propose that because I think we have, council and committee take this very seriously and see it as an important plan, that we should take it offline to an ad hoc committee where we can spend some time really thrashing through it in a less formal atmosphere before bringing it back to this table again. And I've actually circulated a paper version of a resolution on that. And if other members have other proposals, that's great. Otherwise, I would propose putting this forward. So I wait to hear from others first. Your Worship.
Thank you. I guess maybe, Michael, since you sort of brought this, when we're talking about the committee of the whole recommends to council that a strategic plan task force be formed with the following basic terms of reference. That's what you're referring to, correct? So I guess I'm trying to understand what the difference between this task force would be and the committee of the whole. I mean, if it's all a council meeting, and committee of the whole is supposedly sort of the more informal version of a council meeting, so that we get this sort of input. I guess I'm trying to understand what mechanism or what thing you're looking at in a task force that can't be accomplished by keeping it as committee of the whole.
And that's a valid point, I believe. I think that one of the reasons tackling it on a full agenda like this might be a problem is that the budget amount of this meeting is going to be considerable, I imagine, and I think with the points I wanted to make on the strategic plan and the others I've heard, we could absorb an hour and a half on that, and I think once we get to that kind of length of meeting, we're not at our best towards the end when we're doing the budget. And it has been recommended by staff that we just take this to a separate committee of the whole. But at the beginning of the term, we did discuss what form of committees we wanted in this term, and I believe we were told ad hoc committees was a useful way to do this, and I'd like to try that out because I think it has the potential to be much more informal than what we're doing right now.
So, just as a follow-up, if I may, I completely understand, and I understand, I also understood Councillor Kobayashi and Councillor Parkinson's issues regarding, strategic planning and the infrastructure replacement. I also think there's a couple other subcommittees that can easily get struck. So I think there's going to be those things. I guess I'm just looking through the chair to staff around how do you have a task force with the entire council? Can you have a task force with the entire council, or is that not committee of the whole?
Through the chair, you could certainly strike a different committee. It wouldn't be a task force. We would still be required to have a recording secretary here. It would still be considered a meeting of council because more than a quorum would be in attendance. I think the best recommendation is to call a special committee of the whole meeting to deal specifically with the strategic plan, and you could certainly do more than one of those. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Logan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do first want to acknowledge the work that the staff have put into costing the various strategies that Council had come up with in our strategy session. And I think the Director of Finance had some good advice during the week in that perhaps we should adopt a similar type of format as we did with the initial brainstorming session, so we could flush out some more of these strategies now that we have some costing. But it's a less formal process, and we can further refine the strategies and then into something that's more workable. But that, I can imagine that process will take a few hours, and it probably would be worthwhile being facilitated. So we all have the option of participating in that session without having to worry about rules of order and all that jazz, and just have a very free conversation, and then bring back kind of that refined list to this table, committee of the whole, to have that more formalized discussion. And it will give us some more time to further evaluate some of the comments and the costing that staff have done for us. So, because clearly we can't tonight or any one meeting would be difficult to be able to really do that justice.
Yeah. Councillor Kobayashi.
I absolutely agree with Councillor Logan on this issue because it's, and the staff did do a phenomenal job resourcing this. I could not believe what they did, but I thought it was great work, but it's their interpretation of what we felt was necessary. And I'll give you a prime example. When we talked about let's beautify Colwood, for example, my vision of that was maybe a little bit different than what came out, and I've had some discussions with fellow councillors on this, and the beautification that I envision, for example, it's in various other initiatives like having a whole plan for sidewalks, for example, throughout Colwood, and how we would do this over a span of so many years, and lighting and the beautification that I was looking at and what was interpreted is contrary to how I was thinking. Beautification and how they were looking at it was looking at existing infrastructure and the new infrastructure and the new islands with all the plants and all that. I was thinking more along the lines of beautifying all Colwood. We've neglected a lot of areas of Colwood, like the older parts of Colwood, and they should be able to share that we're all one here. And so that's what I mean. So the free-flowing discussions are really important to me, and I'd like to see a lot more citizen involvement in this, because that's a bunch of us sitting around interpreting what we thought we heard as we were knocking on doors. So I think it's an important element that we're missing. That's all I have to say.
Councillor Day.
Thank you. I definitely support taking another look at our strategic plan to really refine how strategic it is and kind of our target dates. We certainly have a lot more information now that staff have gotten back to us about, you know, where they see our priorities fitting and kind of fleshing out the interpretation of the items that we, you know, gave broad strokes to. But the only difficulty I'm having is trying to understand how we move forward here tonight when we're going to be talking about refining our strategic plan. And tonight, I don't know how we make our decisions tonight with something looming in the future for refining our strategic plan.
I think the answer to that is that at any time you're doing your strategic plan, there are other things going on, other things in process anyway. But it's particularly difficult with the date that council gets elected and the nearness of the budget process, that to get an agreed upon strategic plan with the new council before the budget process starts is not really feasible. The budget document we see before us tonight has obviously been in progress for some time. While we were, you know, the new council was still getting its feet under the table. So I think while particularly Appendix B of the budget document does implement a lot of the strategic plan, it will, the next budget document will be the final refinement of meeting whatever we come up with as the final strategic plan.
Mr. Chair.
Councillor Jensen.
Thank you. I don't have much to add that hasn't been said, but I take your point that for me to consider some of these initiatives outlined in the strategic plan, I do need a better understanding of the budgetary process and what that looks like for this coming year and how we action those bits and pieces of the strategic plan that we decide are priorities. And I mean, it's difficult to extrapolate the one without the other. So I would endorse completely that a subcommittee in whatever format is deemed appropriate and that this strat plan be moved to that committee with a report back by a certain date to us as a committee. I would expect, or as a council, I would expect after the budget is complete or near complete, which is, I guess, this February, March. And then those priorities, because I see pretty much everything in the strategic plan as a priority. I suspect strongly that those priorities will shift once we find out how much revenue we have to apply to them, allowing us to achieve portions and measure our outcomes in the coming years.
Councillor Parkinson.
I'm not sure how long I get to use the excuse that, hey, I'm a new guy, I'm just learning, but I'm definitely learning. I think my thoughts of my strategic thoughts for the city have evolved, you know, even over the few months I've been here. I think when I look at what we produced before and the staff spent a lot of time and effort on, I'm not sure I see that as being strategic enough or limited to strategic issues. I think there are a number of sort of basic ongoing operational issues that are in the mix and may make it hard to sort of see the forest for the trees, that we're not looking at some of the big picture things that we've sort of touched on but not got into in depth. So I think the concept of going back into it and doing it again is eminently justified. I'm 3 months smarter than I was last time. And while it's not a big percentage of my life, I think it might be a big percentage of my learning curve. But I have a number of things that I believe are just sort of ongoing staff functions that should just turn over without needing the strategic plan to be, rethought or reimagined or looked further in the future. So I would be prepared to go through the list with a number of items that I think we could probably, in the majority, say, yes, we're all behind those staff, keep churning away on those, and some of these others maybe we do need a little more thinking of or put into a longer term context. So at the appropriate time, I'd be prepared to do a bunch of that stuff.
So, sorry, Councillor Parkinson, are you saying that you'd want to do that tonight, or you think it's appropriate to do that in a separate meeting?
I think it's sort of a question of taking a big problem and hiving off a bunch of the easy parts, that we don't have to think about anymore, and then leaving perhaps a lesser amount for the strategic plan to perhaps get more strategic. So I'd be prepared to do that tonight if anybody's willing to go down that path with me.
Councillor Logan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for getting the conversation started. So to get something on the table, I will move that we refer the strategic plan to a second facilitated strategic planning session.
Okay, as long as we understand that will be open to the public.
That's fine. I envisioned something that was similar to what our first strategic planning session was.
Yeah, I would take staff's advice on that. And I believe we received the advice earlier that wouldn't necessarily be open to the public. And then I think the public being able to have input would be useful. So you moved. I have a seconder in Councillor Jansen. Does anybody wish to speak to the motion? Your Worship.
Sorry, I'm fine with it. We can go that direction, and we'll go down that road. I sincerely, I just don't understand the difference, though. I guess I mean, we're doing this at committee of the whole. I get it that we don't have time tonight, and that we need to parcel off and maybe make these agendas a little tighter. But it would suggest to me that we just need to have committee of the whole more often. That to strike an incomplete different task force that includes the entire. You're giving me a head shake. I'm sorry? This wasn't a task force. Which one's this? This is the strategic plan, correct? That you're going to hire an outside facilitator, right?
Similar process to what we underwent.
So we're doing it once. We're not. This isn't a 5-step process. Okay, then I'm good with it.
And I think that the meeting Councillor Logan is proposing, and I would stand to be corrected by staff, would in effect be another committee of the whole.
Just for clarification, you can certainly have a workshop format with a facilitator. It's still open to the public. There's no clause under the community charter that would allow that to be closed, but it doesn't have to be a committee of the whole formal meeting. It can certainly be a workshop that the public can observe.
That sounds perfect to me. Anybody else wish to speak to this? Then I'll call the vote. All in favor? Any against? Passed. Thank you.
Michael?
Councillor Parkinson?
I just wonder if there's an appetite to take a bunch of the items off the list as being just ongoing and not needing to be discussed further. And if so, I'd be prepared to go down that path. My fellow councillors, I'd like to get some indication.
I think procedurally, Councillor Logan's motion just referred this. And so we now proceed with the next motion. Sorry about that. 7.1, new business. 3310 Hockering Road Subdivision Roadway Standards and Improvement Works. And I think I need to turn this over to staff to introduce. So I'll ask the city engineer.
Through the chair, from the engineering department's perspective, the report you currently are considering is presented to you in its entirety. However, my colleagues Brent Molnar, Director of Development Services, and Christopher Payne, Director of Finance, will address information received by the public notification process and also the information noted in the financial considerations portion of the report.
Brent Molnar speaking. So in regards to the DVP 18-009 at 3310 Hockering, after we wrote the report, staff goes out to the public and seeks public input on it, and the public has up until noon on February 4th to submit their opinions. I provided you a quick summary sheet of to the notices that have been received by mail, email, or other through staff, and a summary of those submissions is quickly summarized as follows. The city received 13 written submissions. One of those written submissions was neither positive or negative. It did speak about the costs to the developer, though, and that they felt that they were high, and offered suggestions for how those costs might be offset by taxes, or rather that frontage values or improvements be set at a value that's relevant to the properties in question. 11 letters of support were received, 8 of which are via form letter, which raised no formal objection or formal statement other than they support the variance. And we received 0 that were not in favor of the DVP being considered tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to make a correction to the financial considerations of the report, and I apologize to the public and to the committee members. So staff were asked to do some financial analysis with regard to this application. And you may recall that as recently as January 21st, we discussed sustainable infrastructure and some of the policies related to asset management. So staff are eager to apply that lens to this application. And what the financial considerations portion of this report says that should council approve a partial variance, the city would need to increase its funding for sustainable infrastructure by $5,000. And we've done further analysis, and we believe that's incorrect. And to the credit of Councillor Parkinson, who asked a brilliant question over the weekend while I was watching the Super Bowl, he pointed out something very, very important that we wanted to highlight with respect to this application. You will recall during the sustainable infrastructure replacement deliberations, we mentioned that the entire city road network forecast for replacement value included upgrading those roads to current standards. So essentially what that means is that the replacement cost forecast for roads would include sidewalk and other improvements that this application is bringing forward. So assuming that the city funds the sustainable infrastructure plan, there is no incremental increase to the budget required if the developer were to approve or were to build these improvements for us. So just to summarize again, the report states that if council were to provide a partial variance and require the developer to provide improvements, frontage works, we would require a $5,000 lift to the budget. That's incorrect. We, assuming that the sustainable infrastructure plan is funded, it's already funded because the road would be rebuilt to that standard. So that's already included in the consideration of the sustainable infrastructure. As well, one thing that we didn't consider in our analysis here is incremental tax revenues, which is part of the equation. And assuming that a subdivision would occur, there would be an additional taxable property and additional revenues that result from that. So again, I apologize for the last minute nature of the change to the financial considerations here, but it was important to note prior to your consideration. Thank you.
Councillor Kobayashi.
Through the chair, great recovery, Chris, because that was my question I had in my notes here. I thought to myself, well, he's speaking out from one side of his mouth and saying something else, but that's great. Thank you very much for clarifying that. That's great. Thank you.
Councillor Logan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I understand council actually dealt with a very similar application on Milburn Drive just within the last 6 months or 8 months or so. So I understand the recommendations that are being proposed are very similar and consistent with those that council past with the development on Milburn. So I just point that out for in terms of wanting to be consistent in how we apply our variances and the standards. That we do remain consistent and we don't pick and choose and vary and that sort of thing. So when it's appropriate, Mr. Chair, I am happy to make the staff recommendation to council.
Moved by Councillor Logan. Seconded by His Worship the Mayor. And speaking to it?
Sorry, and I'm just still trying to understand process with Committee of the Whole. Were you going to allow public to speak on this line item? Or were they just getting, public only gets to talk at the beginning, at the end? When were you going to allow that?
The only other thing that I mentioned we would allow the public to speak to during the meeting was the budget item.
Okay.
Councillor Parkinson.
Thank you. There's a couple things that I have issue with the recommendation from staff. I have a lot of sympathy for the costs this applicant is facing. It seems like having the corner lot is a bit of a penalty for him. I would not support a municipal irrigation system. I think that goes along with Councillor Kobayashi's cost realignment thing. I think that irrigation systems, especially for small minor sections like that, are going to be expensive to operate and maintain for the city. And frankly, those will be the one house that's there already is a very nice house, and the one beside it will be a very nice house too. And I would hope we could have some faith that people will maintain their boulevards in front of very nice houses. So I think we have to be careful about little spatterings of irrigation systems. And the other thing, which is probably contrary to what I've just said about irrigation systems, is sidewalks, where Councillor Logan wants to be consistent with the old council policy. I would like to see this council pursue sidewalks throughout a large portion of the municipality as the people want, and so foregoing them on Hockering is not something I'd be very in favor of. So, things like reducing the road width on Hockering to 6.5 meters from the standard, happy to do that. As I said, no underground thing. I think the concept of the swale and unvegetated swale and the trees are good. I would think lighting on Lagoon Road is worth consideration, but lighting on Hockering, to me, would be a bridge too far. Just again, nice to have, but if we are to consider the finances of the developer, I could forego that one. So my belief would be that we could allow relaxations, not in the curb and sidewalk. I would relax the street lighting on Hockering. I would relax the municipal irrigation system. I would thank the developer for the works as proposed on Lagoon Road, and I would accept the variation in the road width on Hockering. So,
we have a motion on the floor, which is the entire proposed proposal by staff. Do you wish to put your beliefs otherwise in the form of an amendment motion?
I'm happy to. Perhaps I should hear from the rest of my colleagues first. But
Your Worship.
Just as a clarification, so I'm sorry, when we started this meeting, I was not under the impression that the only time public was going to be able to speak. And I'm not trying to be punitive or anything, but one of my concerns is from a committee of the whole standpoint, this was the whole idea of committee of the whole was that we were hearing the public's input on stuff. And if people did come today to speak on this, then I would like to give them an opportunity, even though, and I understand what you said, Councillor Baxter, and I'm not disagreeing with it, but, Selena's interrupting me.
My apologies, I did miss what was happening. Because this is a development variance permit that the committee is considering recommending to council, either for denial or approval, there is a requirement to allow the public to address the committee with respect to this application.
Perfect then. Good. All right. Well, if everybody's okay with it, we'll interrupt the proceedings to ask for input from the public. just come up to the lectern there and please give your name and address. And
Thank you. My name is Dylan Sahota. I'm the developer for this particular property. I'm not a big developer. I'm a small business person. I'm a homeowner. I'm a retired person. I don't have the big deep pockets of these 100-lot subdivisions. So when you're talking about cost, curbs and sidewalks are very, very expensive. I spoke to every one of my neighbors on Hockering Road, and I didn't have any negative responses from anybody. They actually don't want sidewalks on Hockering because it's going to take away from parking. That's what they see. They see an increase in their taxes later on down the road. I've been into this process for almost 2 years now, almost a little over 2 years, and that's a separate issue which I would love to address at some other point. But right now, I'm only here to say that this is very expensive. As far as I'm concerned, it's punitive and onerous. I'm trying to get another lot subdivided, and a cost of $230,000 doesn't even cover basically what I've already spent, which is somewhere in the neighborhood of $30,000 for surveys, for engineers, for plans. So you can add all of those costs, and even once you do go one way or the other, there's still additional costs on top of that. So the costs just keep going on and on and on, which takes away then from the value of even subdividing. I don't understand why somebody would go ahead and do that. If you can cost average that over a large number of properties or parcels, it makes sense. But from a homeowner, this doesn't make sense. I don't understand it. So I'm asking for some relief from this committee so that I can go ahead and put a second house on and increase your tax base and increase your revenues. I will put a beautiful house on that property as well if I'm able to. But like I said, I don't have the deep pockets that some of these big, large developers do. I'm an average person here and a small business person too. So looking for your support.
thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Rick Jeffrey, Colwood resident since 1971, current owner of 3329 Hockering Road. Councillor Parkinson, we don't want any sidewalks in our street. Thank you very much. We do have a parking problem. It's a one block long street. We don't really need the city to be spending that kind of money, or our taxes to be spending that kind of money. So a little input for you. Come down our street and talk to us if you want. However, one of the things that I would like to say to the council is that we have a speed problem in our neighborhood. And you've, or the previous council has ducked that problem by doing a survey and saying the surveys were inconclusive and ergo we're not doing anything. That is not leadership, ladies and gentlemen. You're a new council. You need to show leadership. We need to get the speed on Lagoon Road and Milburn Road under control. And on our street, which is 1 block long, it's a convenient place, especially in the morning, for people to come down Milburn and come 100 miles an hour down Hockering to Lagoon to cut off 2 seconds. We've just about been hit in the morning, so I'd really like, as you consider this subdivision application, about talking about how you're going to reduce the speed on our street. Yeah. And I fully support Mr. Dillon's application. Thank you.
Anybody else from the public?
I hope you can understand me. I'm not a foreigner, Canadian. Anyway, I live on the Lagoon Road, right? 261, that's right next to the property we're talking about. I've lived there for 12 years. And when I first moved in there, I spoke to a few of the gentlemen, not here tonight. I believe I spoke to about it. But they was gonna do the road, the pavement, then, 12 years ago. It was all up in the air. Quatra was going to see to all the sideway and all that sort of thing. It's never happened, okay? You know what's happened there. But the speeding, it's not the speeding as much. The property we're talking about, anyway, let's get back to that, is as a nature reserve, has been. All them trees what are being chopped down. There used to be 8 or 9 deer living there. I've seen the Bambis being born and stuff like that, you know, and the owls and the eagles up in the trees. It's dwindling, okay? The pavement issue should have been done by now. Not by gentlemen who are building houses or whatever. You know, the council should have done that or tried to do it. Let's just try to get it through or something. Because I watch the kids go down that road. Hundreds of little kids, you know, and the teachers are walking backwards to keep the kids on the path, you know, on the grass and the ditch down the side. Big ditches. I've got one right outside my house. It's about 7 foot deep. You know, I've been to council or whatever a few times about this. Nothing's ever been done. When I tried to get my property developed, or not developed, I just wanted to landscape it. They charged me, wanted to charge me $1,000 for engineering, $500. I don't know what that was for. They charged me all this money, but I couldn't get it done how I wanted it in the finish because it wanted engineering. I said, well, just put a few stones in front, landscape it. That's all I wanted. But I went all through that trouble just to tidy my own piece of property up. Now we're going all through this again for my next door's property, which has always been no man's land. Now, if you was to go and see what I call no man's land, which is the lot we're talking about, it's full of stumps, branches. It's been like that for nearly 2 years. I've had to look at that. And I've had to watch the builders on my little deck where I used to have my coffee every day. I haven't used it for 2 years because there's builders over there picking a nose, spitting, whatever, you know, what builders are like. You know, I'm not saying they're, you know, they're just working and got the music on, roofers, everything. Nearly 2 years. I haven't been able to sit on my deck. You know, I used to have a nice view. That's gone. Now, they were supposed to be going to change the bylaws for how big they put houses up and stuff like that. You know, that's the stuff that wants to be looked at. Beautify Colwood. Not wreck it. Colwood is a beautiful place. Beautiful place. I live here, and I chose to live here because that's what it's like. Doesn't need beautifying. It's beautiful as it is. It's people changing it. You know, building these single-dwelling homes. Single-dwelling homes. They're bigger than this. You know, they're huge. They're not single-dwelling homes. Just down the road, you see that massive house down there. I don't think anybody's living in it at the moment. It's been completed for ages. These are things I get mad about. It's a wonder I'm not getting madder. But I'm used to smaller homes. I come from England, as you probably know. 50 years ago, I've been in Canada, though, 50 years. And I've lived in Deep Cove, North Vancouver, West Vancouver. I've seen all this developments going on, you know. So I'm not talking out of the back of my head. It's going to go on. We can't change it, right? We can't change all this building. But at least we can make it good for everybody that lives in Colwood. You know, not just for the few people that come in, I'm going to build a nice house, you know, and get it 3 or 4 stories high. Get some bylaws that say you can only build so high. That's what you guys should be doing. You know, not seeing how much tax revenue you can get
Thank you,
out of
sir.
a new place.
Thank you.
Do you think I'm going
I
on
think
a
we're
bit? But
strayed a
I'm
little
just
bit
telling you.
from the topic of conversation
Yes,
here.
okay, well, okay, I'm sorry about that, but I'm not a regular guy. I don't sit there in front of people and talk, as you know. I'm talking, you know, from the heart, okay?
I understand that. I appreciate it.
And I love Colwood. I love where I live. It's a beautiful place.
It is.
You can't
yes.
beat it.
Do
You
have
don't
any
want to modify it anymore.
Do you have any comments on the frontage improvements?
Them comments, I'd like to be able to have my breakfast on my deck. Now, that bit of property we're talking about now
Yeah.
is still no man's land. The renters that used to live there, they never used to touch it. Now it's a fire hazard because of all them dead branches and tree stumps, they're all there. And if he doesn't get permission to build another house there, that's going to be no man's land, and it's going to sit like that for like a hole in the road in the city. You know what I'm saying? It's going to be a mess.
Thank you, sir.
And that's all I've got to say.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Does anybody else have any comments? Yes, sir. If you'd like to come up to the lectern.
Good evening. I'm Richard Belsky. I've lived in Colwood all my life. That's coming up to 67 years or so. My wife told me not to come up and say anything, but I'm here anyhow, and I can't help but agree with some of the things that are going on, and I didn't realize some of the issues with sidewalks. I agree with my neighbor Rick here and a few of the other people that you don't need sidewalks on every side street. What you're doing is you're cutting out the ambiance and the natural flora and fauna that you have in a lot of the areas. If you put sidewalks in every area along all of Colwood, what have you got? You got a pavement, right? Pay paradise and put up a parking lot. We don't need that. Colwood used to be recognized as, when they first came out and came to fruition, was Colwood, the city of trees. And all we've seen is a lot of disappearing trees. Or they put up a tree that's grows like 50 feet inside of 10 years, and it's 50 feet wide with root systems that go down. A mistake. You're better off to put up deciduous trees, something pretty like downtown. Go with another municipality. Look at what they've done. You've got trees that are natural to downtown Victoria. Been there hundreds of years, and the beautiful blossoms, everything. We could go that way with beautifying Colwood, rather than putting in trees or super high lights that block out the stars at night. Nice low lights would be cool. Something that's facing the ground rather than facing the sky. That's beautifying Colwood. But the boulevards at individual streets like Aloha, Anchorage, Millburn, all those ones that come up the road naturally, let's let them either be dressed out as grass or just, but not paved. I can see where you need a sidewalk someplace on Lagoon, maybe on the lower side that the new company is at, what is it called? That's in there, not a Quattro, it's something else. Two Waters. Okay, well, one water, two water. But anyhow, if they put it down that side of the road, which is the natural side of the road that the sidewalk's already on, and they just paved up on the corner, that they continue a sidewalk on that side of the road. Mind you, it sloughs a bit, so maybe it needs some improvement, right? Right. Improvement of the road. And the kids, the little kids that are in kindergarten that go up and down there, the echo kids, those are the ones that go into the bush and they're out all day long. They go down there and they're about knee-high to a grasshopper. They're really tiny and they're all in their muddy buddies and all got their hoods and their backpacks, and their teachers are walking backwards to keep them in line like little ducks. And it is scary to watch some of the cars race, not just down the hill, which would you think that would be the way they go. They race up the hill, you know. Tonight I barely got out of my driveway without being clipped coming here. So, yeah, it's the road's a little too speedy. But as far as I'm for the applicant and getting his house built on there, as long as it's a quality built home, you'll get quality taxes, and we'll be in a quality neighborhood with like-minded people, you know. And that's all I have to say on the subject. I just, you guys are doing a good job trying to weave your way through a new council and all that stuff. And congratulations on getting elected.
Thank you. Any further comments? Seeing none, I'll return to the table. We have a proposal in front of us, a motion in front of us, and does anybody wish to speak to it further? Councillor Day?
Thank you. I just had one question for staff, and it was with regard to the mountable curb. We had said the motion calls for a reduced width on Hockering and no curb, gutter, or sidewalk on Hockering. But I wondered about the impact on our roadway with not having the mountable curb at the edge of the pavement, and whether that made a difference to the long-term survivable length of lifespan for the roadway.
The staff wish to comment on the efficacy of curbs in preserving roadways?
Through the chair, I did not hear the entirety of the question. Could Councillor Day please repeat it?
Sure. I'm just wondering about the non-mountable curb, which is being not enforced in the staff recommendation for Hockering, and whether or not having the curb edge on the side of the road would improve the lifespan.
Through the chair, no, it should have no bearing on the lifespan of the road itself.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? Councillor Kobayashi?
Just, can I get a repeat of the motion that's on table right now, please?
The motion is exactly what's in the report currently.
Perfect.
Yeah. So I'll speak to this, and I just want to draw everybody's attention to something that one of the speakers said about, in fact it was mentioned twice, small children walking down Lagoon Road with their teachers. And if you just look at the layout of the neighborhood, Lagoon is a major travel route for everybody. And if there were decent sidewalks down Lagoon, there would be a lot more people who walk that. As it is, there are people who walk that frequently, and as we heard, whole school parties. Now, I just have a question for staff on that topic. What is the required width of sidewalk on Lagoon under this recommendation? Not sure who wants to answer that.
Through the chair, both streets have a 1.5 meter sidewalk allotment for it. So for Lagoon, 1.5 meters is the zone, and it's intended to be right up against the curb.
And my experience of building sidewalks in municipalities is that 1.5 meter sidewalk right next to a curb on a road with that volume and that speed is not safe enough. I think given the nature of the road, the nature of the destination points at either end of it, and the other factors, I think that should be a 2.5 meter sidewalk. Now, I do sympathize with the developer. Most of my working life, it's been the practice of the municipalities I've worked in not to require a single lot split into two to improve both frontages on a corner lot. It's too big of a burden. And a single frontage is improvement would put the developer in the same boat as anybody else with any other lot. So I appreciate that the proposal before us is to achieve that, but I would like to add H, vary the cross-section for a collector road pursuant to, and quote the appropriate schedule and drawing, by constructing a sidewalk 2.5 meters in width. And I'll make that an amendment to the motion. Any discussion? Well, I need a seconder. Sorry.
Through the chair, what the developer is proposing, the sidewalk is actually on the other side of the swale on Lagoon Road. So the standard that's being varied is against the roadway itself, but what the applicant is proposing, the portion of sidewalk on Lagoon is actually on the other side of the swale towards the property line.
Thank you. Thank you. In light of that, I would amend my amendment to read 1.8 meters instead of 2.5. Any seconder? Sorry? Oh, no seconder at committee. Right. Thank you. Any discussion?
So, I don't know. I don't know what's 1.5, 1.8. I guess my difficulty is I, as mayor, need to depend on my staff to make those determinations. And so unless staff are saying to me that 1.8 is much more necessary than 1.5, I think I'll be supporting the staff recommendation. So I actually, through you, I will look to the staff. Is there any reason why we would increase to 1.8 from your rationale?
Through to the chair, I don't believe that 1.8 was contemplated, so I don't know whether it would fit or not. I simply don't have that level of detail in front of me.
Yeah.
Sorry, folks. Through the chair as well, I wish to draw your attention to page 40 of your agenda package, if that is all quick and possible and easy for you to do, and page 41 of your 222-page agenda package. There is a picture in there under section 2.3.1 of the works that are proposed for Hockering, which are being proposed to go to nil. As we've heard tonight, several people have spoken about that factor. And there's also a picture of what is to be proposed on Lagoon Road. For clarity, as the Director of Engineering has indicated, portions of the swale were intended to be enclosed for portions of Hockering. I've got the street right. Note for Lagoon. And that would allow a little bit of separation from the sidewalk for increased travel safety. I also wish to point out that on one side of the road in that cross-section, the sidewalk is 1.5, and on the other side of the road, the cross-section is 2.0. So we do have flexibility on achieving a wider profile than 1.8 if committee should so wish. And we do also have the ability to create some separation, if we'd like, from the curb edge to increase the perceived safety of that alignment as well. The developer has agreed to enclose that swale on that portion of roadway, so that does allow for some flexibility to it. I just wish to table that for your consideration.
So I'm not quite sure what you're saying there, Mr. Mulder. The proposal, as written in the recommendation in the report, would see a sidewalk of 1.5, yes?
Thank you, Your Worship. Through the chair. The sidewalk has been proposed for the portion of Lagoon. The developers agreed to essentially build all that portion of Lagoon, so it's 2 meters as proposed.
Okay.
I was in error before, and that's why I wish to speak. So it's the 2 meters. The cross-section that you see in your report does show it attached to the sidewalk, but by enclosing that ditch, we have the ability to move it a hair. However, the grade on the property side does raise quite dramatically, so we're not able to shift it right wholly back to avoid retaining wall issues.
Okay. Councillor Day.
Thank you. I just wanted to add that from the Disabilities Committee's perspective, it makes a great deal of difference to have a wider sidewalk and less cross grades. So where staff was explaining that there's some wiggle room, but there is a retaining wall issue, so they will have to try to determine how best to fit that sidewalk into that space. And it's also very important to have good access off the sidewalk. So the curb cuts are obviously very important to people with disabilities. And what people with disabilities also share that in common with young families with strollers. So it's infinitely a better pedestrian environment when there is more width. And the sidewalk on the other side of Lagoon is 2 meters wide. So I think it would make a lot of sense to have a sidewalk that was similar to the other side of the road in as much as we can, and it would be more perceived to be more safe if it was a little farther away from the edge of the road.
So, Mr. Molnar, given that there seems to be some flexibility, I'm inclined to pursue the amendment in any case, just to nail that one down, that it would be 1.8 if separated from the road and 2.0 if beside the road. If we can proceed with the amendment on that basis. So are we ready for a vote on the amendment? All those in favor? All those against? Amendment fails. Okay, the original motion. We ready to vote on that? Well, I think we're done with public input. Yeah. Yeah, sure. Councillor Parkinson.
Could I move that we drop the municipal irrigation system? Make that amendment?
You can move that, absolutely. Any discussion on dropping them, Councillor Day?
Thank you. I just will speak against that. It's been an issue a number of times. Not having irrigation has led to a lot of limitations on beautification. So I just think I do understand why you would want to do that for cost savings. However, I do think it's important to have good-looking boulevards when we have boulevards, and I think the irrigation would be helpful.
I think, well, I'll speak to it when everybody else is finished. Councillor Kobayashi.
Just a question, Mr. Chair. I'm a little confused here. So potentially we have a sidewalk to nowhere, and we have an irrigation system to nowhere. I mean, I don't think we're using our common sense here. Just educate me, someone, because I'm missing something here.
I'd be happy to educate you on the sidewalk. The thing is that the city, I'm assuming we would all agree, needs a sidewalk down Lagoon. It's a major thoroughfare. And if you can get a developer to build a bit of it now, it saves you money later. In the end, it all gets built. But if every time an opportunity like this comes up, you say, well, it's a sidewalk to nowhere, then when you do come to build it, you're spending a lot of extra money that you didn't have to. Any further? The irrigation system, I'm totally on board with getting rid of the irrigation system, simply because this, I believe this municipality still intends to be water smart, and irrigating grass in a climate like this in the summer is going against that. Mr. Molnar, you had something to add.
Thank you. The irrigation system is intended to be for the purposes of the establishment period of, frankly, the trees. Lawn will grow, die, reestablish itself, grow, die, and do all that series of things. Trees, however, have been shown to to greatly benefit from a drip irrigation system that helps their establishment period. Yes, it is a short time gain. It's recommended that you water trees for 2 to 3 years to help that establishment cycle, and then frankly turn it off, because you don't want the tree to be reliant on that supplemental supply of water. You'd like it to be reliant on itself. Through past experience with this municipality and elsewhere, homeowners overspraying is a potential for establishing boulevard health as well. One of the problems that seems to arise in recent years is when the CRD mandates water restrictions. The city's out of control of that, obviously. So, and we're obviously in support of those we may be in support of those water restrictions, and the tree may suffer in that same period. So that's the purpose of the irrigation system. It is intended to be a stopgap maneuver, and there are other tools available, such as direct injection into the trees, which is very costly and maintenance high and rich, or there is please help us residents and hope that the tree survives.
So this is a drip irrigation system, so it'd be fairly low volume system.
The irrigation system as intended for this development would ultimately cover both areas. So yes, it would be a grass and establishment, plus we're looking at a landscaped or grass swale as well. So we'd like that those whatever plants get rooted before a rainfall event, and then essentially you'd be able to phase off that irrigation. So it's intended to be full coverage, and then trees, and then nothing.
Any further discussion on that proposed amendment? All those in favor? All those against? I think I just voted for it, yeah, because I didn't stick my hand up. The amendment passed. So we're back to the original motion as amended by removing the irrigation system. Any further discussion? All those in favor? All those against? Passes. Thank you. Parks Department levels of service. What is your pleasure, committee? First, do we want staff to staff, do you have any comments to make on this?
Through the chair, committee has before them a draft report outlining the city's current level of service for parks. At this point in time, I have nothing further to add to the report, but look forward to the discussion. Both myself and Rob Boyle, Manager of Public Works, are here to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
And does the public have any comment on these proposed levels of service? Seeing none. Committee, Councillor Day.
Thank you. Unfortunately, I grabbed my wrong iPad tonight, so I don't have all my notes. So hopefully I can remember a lot of it. There was, I realize that this is new in establishing maintenance service level for all of our parks, and there were a few anomalies that I noticed. One anomaly that I noticed was Elizabeth Ann Park, which has 64 hours per year for what is essentially an undeveloped lot, I guess you'd call it, in a neighborhood that gets mowed occasionally. It seemed like a lot of hours for a relatively seldom used park, comparing it to, say, Afriston Park, which is another very small park. It only got 8 hours of, in the summer months, it got 10. So quite a big difference between two small parks. There was also, I noted that, I always want to call it Promenade Park in Royal Bay was not noted in the pathways that are maintained, and it has a significant pathway It has been waiting for several years to have the path materials upgraded. It was built when Royal Bay was originally built, the woods area of Royal Bay, and the path surface was stone dust, which was very good. That is a surface that has worn very well, especially for people with disabilities who may choose to access our parks. It compacts very well. It doesn't wash away in the rains, and a good amount of the surface area adjacent to the lookout has been replaced with a road-based material that isn't wearing nearly as well and has caused some erosion problems. So just, it wasn't in there and we didn't have any hours for it, and I know that there is one set of stairs and that definitely needs maintenance. So I think that it might be very worthwhile for us to do the committee idea that Councillor Baxter mentioned earlier, to do a real thorough look at our levels of service, because that's a big ticket item for the taxpayers of Colwood, and it would allow us to get perhaps some more in-depth look at what is or isn't in our service levels so far.
Any further discussion?
Through the chair, would you like me to answer the
If you have any
original
answers,
question?
that would be great.
So with regard to Elizabeth Ann Park, there is also staff allocation for removing invasive plants. So you would have a higher number of hours associated with removal of invasives in that location.
Thank you. Any discussion? Councillor Day?
Thank you. There's also a very large culvert and waterway in Elizabeth Ann Park. Is that included in the level of service for parks?
Through the chair, culverts and waterways will be under Public Works for storm drainage.
Okay.
Not associated with the park itself, no.
Okay. Just, it's a significant safety issue for children in that park.
Councillor Parkinson?
Through you, it struck me that 16 and a half full-time equivalents on the parks out of a total staffing in Public Works of 25, I believe. It just seemed disproportionate that all the roads and sewers and other things get maintained with half as many people as the parks. Is that correct? Am I reading that correct? Lee?
Through the chair, parks are very labor intensive, so other areas will have ongoing maintenance tasks, but they'll be very specific. Parks, they do take a lot of time, and depending on what the park is comprised of, there's a lot of person hours associated to it that you may not immediately recognize just simply by looking at the park.
I have a question, Ms. Hoagland. The current number of parks, FTEs, the number that worked this year, how many was that?
Through your worship, through the chair. Interestingly enough, for the most part, parks and roads swap activities. So as road activities increase, then we would have parks FTEs go and supplement that, and vice versa, the opposite way around. So there's a certain amount of flux insofar as person hours associated with parks and with roads. And so you'll end up having before you a similar exercise done for the roads department that also includes sanitary. And so that will be where you'd really see where one side will impact on the other. And so currently, the way that we've been looking at this is determining what activities will require the full-time equivalencies or person hours associated with them, and then move forward to see where we would best allocate those hours. So the levels of service for parks, we're looking to simply ensure that we have a benchmark to work towards, and we may not meet some of the levels of service in 1 year, but at least we know what they're supposed to be. And we would augment staff to try to make sure that we would achieve those levels of service. But it's very difficult right now to indicate how many people are allocated to parks simply because of the way that our labor fluxes between the two.
Thank you. Councillor Logan, I think.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I may have missed it, but I think, is there a motion on the table?
Not currently on this.
Okay, thank you. So the director pointed this out, that we actually haven't got a baseline to work with yet, and that's one thing we have not done very well in the past. So really this year is going to be a bit of a learning exercise, and this time next year we'll have some really good metrics in terms of what the true costs are to maintain our park. So I looked at some of the numbers, and I was a bit suspect about some of the allocation and the amount of hours, but we'll have a better idea, a truer idea next year. What I think we should be discussing is the quality of the maintenance that we're receiving, and whether we actually want to increase the standard, especially in certain areas of the maintenance that we want to see. So we all know that the better a municipality looks like, especially as people enter, the more inviting the municipality is to invest in, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So my way of thinking is that we need to have some really good discussion in terms of what the maintenance standards are, the specific maintenance standards are as of our boulevards as we enter the municipality from View Royal and other areas, and what type of show we actually want to put on, and how we want to portray our municipality to those that want to invest. I think that's probably the discussion that we want to have sometime this year, to give Public Works some very clear expectations, because I think that's what they're looking for, some very clear expectations in terms of what standard we expect our crews to maintain our boulevards and maybe certain parks at. And then next year we'll have a clearer picture in terms of the actual FTE and number of hours that are required to maintain our parks.
Councillor Jensen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had a question for our Madam Engineer, if I may. Since this is the first stab at this, there are some significant numbers to digest, and some escape me as far as how they make sense. But for this 2019 calendar year, are we keeping careful maintenance records as to how much time is spent in a particular location so that we can track this in the next years?
Through the chair, yes. We have significantly changed the way that we are going to track costs in regard to parks activities. So each park will have, and does currently have, a cost center associated with it. So we'll be able to tell how many hours and how much money we've spent labor-wise on each park.
I'm sorry, just specifically, does that include the boulevards and islands and the like as well?
Through the chair, yes. We'll have a activity code for boulevard maintenance, and those costs will be clearly articulated.
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Parkinson.
Interesting. I was actually on the Colwood Parks Committee probably 25 years ago when we looked at a bunch of these parks, and I remember specifically at the time Elizabeth Ann, and it only sticks in my brain because it's my wife's name, but I remember, there was one we thought, well, gee, I don't think we're ever going to develop this. We should, sell it or do something. Of course, 25 years ago, it wasn't worth what it is today, but now we start to look at these annual costs every year, and, maybe we should. So My sense is we're coming around at the table to basically saying, we don't know if these are the right numbers or not. Let's carry on, but let's definitely set aside some time to explore, are these the right numbers? What is the level of service we want to do? How many parks do we want? And is it the same thing? So I guess subject to agreeing to reconvene, and I don't want to go a year. I think, by the time these numbers come back to us next year, we should have some pretty firm thoughts on where we want to go. But I don't think any of us really have any idea strongly enough to change the numbers in front of us. I mean, they're the best estimates of staff for what's been going on, and let's not make knee-jerk decisions, but let's agree that sometime in the fall we'll have a more fulsome discussion of all the issues around the parks and carry on with what we have in front of us tonight.
I'd just like to get a clear picture on the costs. Currently, in the accounting system, I believe that public works employees, which includes parks employees, have to record their time to account codes. Is that right?
Yes. We record time spent on activities. That is correct.
And that's been going on for a number of years. And although it hasn't involved recording to individual parks, a employee working on parks has at least had to record that they were working on parks because they had to have an account code. Is that correct?
That is the premise, yes. I cannot speak to past years' practice of correctly allocating time to specific activities or parks.
Can finance speak to that?
I would also add that the level of detail that setting service levels requires hasn't necessarily existed in the past in terms of technological capability or desire and design. So, in 2017, the Finance Department did put together a new accounting software that provides a lot more functionality for service level budgeting, and the new Public Works Manager is taking advantage of that just recently.
No, I completely understand that, but I think it would be possible for previous years to extract how many hours were spent on parks writ large. No detail at all, just parks.
I don't think staff are confident that would provide any predictive value at this point.
Okay, it's just the 16.5 FTEs that we've got here for parks. It's important for this table to understand whether that is an increase compared to previous years or a decrease. If we approve these levels of service and we actually want to achieve them, I suspect we would see a very large increase in the budget that you would produce as a result. I'm pretty sure that you've got 25 FTEs in public works, you got 16.5 proposed for parks, that what you're going to propose for roads is going to be more than the difference, which would be 8.5.
Through the chair, it's important to keep in mind that FTEs are full-time equivalencies. They're not necessarily full-time bodies. They're hours associated with a full-time equivalency. So it doesn't mean that we would necessarily have 16 regular full-time bodies that state parks. It's essentially a way of calculating the number of hours and making it into something meaningful. So we could simply have said it takes 220 hours. But what we're trying to do is say, it's a lot easier to wrap someone's head around the fact that however X number of hours equals a pretty much a full-time person. So I just want to make it really clear that we're not necessarily saying that we would have 16.5 or however people in parks. What we are saying is the number of hours would add up to an equivalency.
I completely understand that. I understand that 16.5 FTEs means you could have 33 people working half-time, or you could have 66 people working a quarter time, but it's still 16.5 bodies of some description at some point in time being paid an hourly wage. And I'm trying to get at whether this 16.5 represents an increase in service or a decrease. And it would seem that we don't know that.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I think you touched on a good point. And adding to some of the Director of Engineering's comments, the service level determination for roads and utilities is required to see the overall impact due to the fluid nature of the use of the crews. So as the Director mentioned earlier, one day a laborer may be working the parks, the next day they might be working on the roads. So we need to know what is the overall service level requirement for the entire crew, which is being worked on, to determine whether or not it actually represents a budget increase or a budget decrease. So what staff are proposing right now is this is what's going on right now in parks to their best best calculation. We have not increased the budget to reflect additional FTEs, but when we get the complete picture, we'll be able to provide the full financial picture. Council will then be discharged with the ability to vary service levels and the budget implications of that.
Thank you. Councillor Kobayashi.
Just a question through Chair to the Director of Engineering. What we call the Colwood Cenotaph in West Shore Parks and Rec, the one that we celebrate, we do the Remembrance Day ceremony. Can you tell me who's responsible for maintaining it? Is it the City of Colwood, or is it, who is it? Because it's a disgrace, that's all I can tell you.
Through the chair, I am not certain. I can definitely look into it and get back to you.
Councillor Jensen.
I'm going to have to wait till we have some of our budget discussions, but I find it difficult to assign a number to the number of employees that we may require if they're being shuffled around from department to department to department. I mean, I'm going to need to see an entire report for all their activities as opposed to broken down to park by park if we're to entertain a discussion about whether we need an increase in FTEs or a decrease or what the situation is. And I find that this is good material. It's going to take me a while to digest some of it. Actually, I'm going to have to drive around and find where some of these parks are. But that's the part I'm struggling with is, are we going to get a similar report for the activities for the roads crew? Are we going to get a similar report for, the people fixing the vehicles, so that it all gets sauced into the mix when it comes to bean counting, or what?
Through the chair, the answer to that is yes.
Councillor Parkinson.
Yeah, I guess maybe to the Director of Finance. I'm not missing anything here. I mean, this is our estimate of the work that's going on today out of the 25 people, and the rest of the 8.5 FTEs are doing what they're doing today on the road. So essentially by saying, let's carry on at this work, saying let's carry on with the workforce we have now and the work effort that we think is going on. Is not missing that, am I?
Precisely. Thank you.
Councillor Day.
I just wanted to let everybody know with regard to the cenotaph that it had been a subject of discussions with Ani as to whether or not it could potentially be incorporated into a new town square. So just something else to throw in the mix.
Do I have a motion? Councillor Parkinson?
I move that we accept this level of service for our parks going forward for this year.
Are you assuming that the budget will be based on that this year, or is this a target level of maintenance, in your view? I want to understand what the motion means.
I would assume that that would be reflected in the budget for this year, correct? Yes?
Thank you. Councillor Day?
Okay.
Thank you. Just, I think I would be remiss, and I don't want to be cranky, but I would be remiss if I didn't speak up and say that I have considerable discomfort with the way that this is rolled out, not just this year, but for many years. Getting a handle on how we use resources of the city is, I think, an important job for councils to take on, and one that the public expects us to be able to answer with clarity. And at the moment, I don't feel like I have clarity. I feel like I have not enough clarity. And I've heard for many years from members of the public who've had concern that we don't know when it comes to budget time exactly what we're approving or supporting. And that's, unfortunately, I have to be honest and say that's how I feel right now. I think that we have excellent staff who do work very hard to maintain parks, lots of parks in the city of Colwood, a surprising number. And they do a great job of working on so many different areas. But as far as bringing that information back to this table and through us to our community to say, this is what we're doing, I don't feel I have that information. I've been waiting for many years for clarity on that. And I recognize that every organization is on a, we're all on our learning curves, and we're trying to do the most that we can with what we have. But I think we do really need to understand the service levels in our parks, because we do have a lot of them. It's a big cost driver, and we need to understand what the accountability is for the public in seeing that through. So I'm supporting the levels that we have going forward, but I'm just trying to be really straightforward and say that we really do need to get a better handle on this and be able to report more clearly in the coming years.
Any further? Councillor Kobayashi?
Yeah, I support the matrix as is, because I'm certainly not an expert in this, and you have to rely on your expertise and staff to do this. But I agree with Councillor Day that we should have the dashboard. There should be a dashboard for this, and based on complaints against the parks, right? And that's going to help us move the polls here, So I think that's a good thing for the scoreboarding that we want to do. So if you can set us up a system like that, I think that'd be great, and that would just encompass everything. Just my comment.
Any further, Your Worship?
Thank you. I guess I just want to stick a little bit up for staff, because if you look at 3.4 in the discussion, it basically outlines exactly what the last two councillors have spoken about, which says beginning in 2019, all parks will have their own cost codes, which will ensure staff to properly allocate budget requirements to facilitate for the approved levels of service. Other activities will be similar to be coded, which will allow the city to further define and refine its service levels. yeah, we haven't done it in the past, but I think we put it in place that this is exactly the direction we're moving towards. So I actually celebrate and congratulate staff for actually having that vision and to move that forward.
Any further discussion? I just want to support what the mayor said. I think that what's coming is what we've needed for a long time, and I think it's wonderful that we're going there. I'm a bit disappointed that we weren't able to extract anything out of the existing accounting system, but it would have been very approximate at best. And I think that I would rather see these levels of maintenance approved as aspirational. I don't think we're going to be able to get there in a single year's budget, but at this point, that's a belief. There's no rock solid evidence to base that on. So I'll call the motion. All those in favor? All those against? Passed. Councillor Parkinson.
Could I also ask that we have a session, presumably committee, I'm going to suggest in the fall, where staff could hopefully feed us information where we can discuss the level of service, the number of parks, and any payment streams, just so that we have some chance, a little more lead time coming into hopefully a more fulsome discussion of this issue. I would want to see it just coming at us amongst another 200 pages at the same time next year. I think it'd be worthwhile to have a little session where we do, as we've heard people saying, we have to go around and look at these parks. It'd be useful to do it perhaps during the summer when we get a sense of what maintenance is going on. So I think that's the only way we're going to be able to really address fairly what we think about a level of service, to have perhaps a more detailed, in-depth, specific session on it.
Well, I think it's a great idea that everybody on council visit every park in the community, because you'd be really surprised about some of the gems that are hidden there if you've never been. But Councillor Parkinson, you're saying that by early fall, say, we will have some of these numbers in, and we would be able to perhaps proceed. Can I just ask staff when this system will be 100% up and running?
Mr. Chair, the system is running, but I'm going to defer the question to Director of Engineering.
Through the chair, we'll be bringing forward in the fall the levels of service associated with the rest of public works, and you'll be able to see that the more fulsome picture actually, at that time anyway. So that's already planned to be before you.
What I was getting at is how many months of financial information will we have under the new system by, say, October?
By October, there'll be 10 months.
Excellent. Good. Then I believe that Councillor Parkinson made a motion that we asked for a review of these levels of service at that time. Am I right there? Anybody wish to speak to that motion? Councillor Kobayashi. No? All those in favor? All those against? Passed. Great. Now, some wonderful news. Government Finance Officers Association Distinguished Budget Award Presentation. So the City of Colwood has been awarded this for the 2018 to 2022 financial plan. And I must admit I didn't see that one in detail, but looking at the current 2019 to 2023 financial plan, it's the best thing I've ever seen. It's fabulous. And I gather it is an improvement on the one we got the award for. I was really, really pleased to read a financial plan that you could read so easily and understand what it was all about. It was wonderful. Didn't have to spend hours trying to figure it out and then go and ask the the CFO anyway. These awards were established in 1984, not in 1884, to encourage and assist local governments to prepare budget documents to the very highest quality that reflect both the guidelines established by the National Advisory Council on Local Budgeting and the GFOA's best practices on budgeting, and then to recognize individual governments that succeed in achieving that goal. This award also recognizes the invaluable contribution made by the city's communication manager. Her work translates the city's detailed and complex financial information into a transparent, understandable, and I have to say very, very pleasant to look at award-winning financial plan. So I'd congratulate our communications manager and our finance staff for fantastic work that helps us progress the city's work as well as giving us another award to go on the wall as well. Well done.
Mr. Chair, if I might, and I'm not sure if it's worthy or not, or if it's superfluous, but if we put forward a motion that recognizes all the staff members who are involved in the production of this document from top to bottom, from this council, expressing our formal thanks.
All those in favor? All those against? So now, Director of Finance, operating budget deliberations. So the city must adopt a financial plan prior to May 15th. Today marks the beginning of the budget deliberations, not the beginning of the budget work, because finance has been working on this for quite some time, but it's now together in a format for our deliberations. There are currently 4 committee meetings scheduled for budget deliberations, February 4th, 6th, 19th, and the March 4th. So this draft financial document in front of you is broken down into a number of sections, and the finance officer will present parts of that now, starting at the beginning and going through it, and then continue on each of the subsequent meeting days. So we're hoping tonight to get through core operating budgets, corporate administration, finance, information technology, fire, policing, and building bylaw services. Capital budget discussions are scheduled for February 19th and March 4th, with the February 6th being devoted to the other department core operating budgets. After budget deliberations have concluded, at the end of these 4 meetings, staff will prepare a financial plan bylaw for final approval by council. And Director of Finance, would you care to take us through the plan?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And just a reminder to the very large group in the audience, it's actually probably record numbers. If anybody would like to have input and provide comment on any section, we will pause in between core budgets and allow for public participation. So thank you very much. So what we will do today, we're just going to discuss the budget timeline, talk a bit about the revenues, some of the special projects, and then we'll start going through the service plans. So the service plans are the core operating budget of the different, the various operating budget departments. Later on, we've dedicated 2 days to capital and asset management. We do find that we go through every capital project one at a time, so it takes a bit more time. So those meetings are later on, as the chair mentioned. So just a reminder of the timeline. First 2 meetings, February 4th, February 6th. We've got core budget, February 19th, and March 4th, committee of the whole for capital. Once we've accumulated all of council comments and direction, it'll come forward in the form of a bylaw, financial plan bylaw. April 8th will be the first, second, third reading of that bylaw. And that's really the final stamp of approval from council that provides staff with spending authority. One thing I'll just mention, Mr. Chair, recognizing that it's 7:45, we have some flexibility in the timing of this. We should aim to get through all of the core operating budgets between now and the next meeting on Wednesday. Granted, though, that there's no other items on the agenda for the special committee of the whole on Wednesday, so we do have some flexibility if it's the will of the committee to pause at some point that earlier, for instance. I'm not anxious to go home. My wife has put the kids to bed, so. So one question that we get often at the finance department from members of council and the public is, why are we budgeting for 2019 when 2019 has already started? Intuitively speaking, you want to budget beforehand, right? That's the whole process of budget. So I understand where the question comes from. So here's the answer. Essentially, when we adopt a financial plan bylaw, it's a 5-year bylaw. So it provides staff with the legal authority to spend for those 5 years. So we have the legal authority to spend in 2019 pursuant to the 2018 financial plan bylaw. Otherwise, we would grind to a halt. We would stop paying staff. We would do essentially what happened in the States just recently. And also there's a lot of legislative timelines we need to keep in mind. Some members of the public might be very familiar with the assessment timeline. So we'll receive our final assessment numbers in March. And that does have an impact on our budget, our non-market change construction revenue, for instance, and also how the tax rates will be structured. We don't receive external budgets until April and May, so the CRD budget isn't due to us until April. The school tax, the provincial budget, isn't due to us until May. So the entire picture of the impact of the taxpayer, we don't have any ability to get that full picture until May. So we budget now. The figures are more accurate, and so you have a higher quality budget. Now, if staff were asked to back that budget up, there's municipalities that do it all over the place. So it absolutely can be done. Just keep in mind that the accuracy of the numbers will be impacted by that, but it's absolutely something that we could do. So this is the consolidated picture of the draft budget right now. And please keep in mind that the draft budget represents all accumulated council direction up to this point. And we recognize at staff that we have many new faces on the council, so this might not represent what the future holds in council in terms of our strategic plan. But we don't want to be presumptuous, right? We're neutral public servants. This is the direction that we've been given, and this budget, to the best of our ability, represents the direction up to this point. So we've got a 1.04% increase to taxes as a result of core. So essentially that means if everything remained absolutely status quo, the average residential taxpayer would be paying an additional 1%. There's other things that have impacted the budget that are outside of our control and some that are inside of our control. The employer health tax is impacting our budget by 0.56%. So the city previously paid a portion of MSP premiums for its staff. Now we're being required to pay the employer health tax, and the incremental difference of that is about 0.5% tax increase this year. There's a couple new service requests, pond maintenance, that comes out of our stormwater master plan. That represents a small increase. The finance department are recommending a tax appeal allowance budget be established, but we'll talk about that in further detail through the presentation. And lastly, the most recent direction, I will say it's not official direction from council because it actually hasn't arrived at the council table. It's been discussed at the committee table, and that would be the Sustainable Infrastructure Reserve increase of 1%. So the total is 2.9%.
Through the chair, can you just explain this pond maintenance for me? Because I was looking all over for it, and I don't understand what that is.
Thank you. And we'll have more of an opportunity to discuss pond maintenance in detail when we get to the engineering requests. Because what we do is we separate status quo budget with anything that's new. And that gives council the opportunity to give the stamp of approval to what is an expanded service, because that really is a policy decision. So sorry, to answer your question, there are numerous ponds that have been detailed in our asset inventory by our stormwater master plan. And the recommendations that flow out of that stormwater master plan that came from yesterday is we should be maintaining these ponds. If you want to ask why or what it will do, I recommend being around on Wednesday when the Director of Engineering can answer that. That's where it comes from. Thank you. So looking at some of our revenues, we forecasted non-market change of $200,000. And just to remind folks, I use terms interchangeably, and I apologize for that. New construction taxation revenue, new construction revenue, non-market change revenue, they all mean the same thing in this context. And essentially, it's taxation derived from buildings that were just built this year. So we just had a subdivision application that came through. Presumably that will be developed. We'll have a new home that will provide new taxes. The reason that we separate this specifically, it's principled base. When we develop our community, when we have new homes, the assumption is that our operating expenses are going to increase as a result of that. So we're going to have a higher population in the municipality. That's going to increase our operating expenditures. Or we're going to have new services such as a new park. That's going to increase our operating expenditures. So we separate the new construction revenue from that year, and we use it to fund those sort of things. So that way, the existing community isn't funding the operating expenditures that result from new construction. We hope that it becomes self-funding, essentially. So we're predicting $200,000. Mind you, we're in the middle of the appeal process at the BC assessment, and so the final numbers will come in March. We've forecasted an increase in our grant.
We actually has another question.
Yeah. So typically, what has that number been over the last 3 or 4 years?
It's quite volatile. Last year was 502,000, and I don't know previous to that. Yeah. So, for instance, last year we used the non-market change revenue to fund the establishment of a new IT department, recognizing that that's a new service that results from a growing community, and there was a number of other things. You will recall from the Sustainable Infrastructure Reserve recommendations as well, if we don't identify direct incremental operating expenditures that result, we are putting it in our infrastructure reserve so that we can close the funding gap for our infrastructure replacement. So that's where it's going at the moment. So yes, our grant in lieu of taxes, we're forecasting an increase of $86,000, and that's 99% composed of federal properties that pay us a grant instead of paying us taxes. We're forecasting an 8% increase to our 1% utilities. So for folks that don't know what this means, we allow Shaw, we allow Fortis, we allow Synovus Gas, et cetera, to operate within our borders, and legislatively they have to pay us 1% of the revenues they earn from the customers within our borders. So this can fluctuate quite a bit. It really depends on their financial success. The good news about it is that they're reporting on revenues from a couple of years ago, so we have very accurate figures. Our operating grants, we're projecting a decrease of $13,000, and this is mainly because we're phasing out reliance on our small community grants. So the small community grant is approximately $200,000 that we receive from the provincial government, and as we grow, that is going to be eroded. So the finance staff have taken a proactive approach by phasing it out over a number of years rather than seeing a sharp decline in 1 year of $200,000 or whatever it might be. So we will probably receive more than we've projected in this year, but the purpose of this is to promote tax increase stability. You'll see that there's significant fluctuations in our capital grant, and that's simply because we use our deferred revenue, our gas tax, to fund capital. So when we expend funds for capital, then we recognize the gas taxes revenue in that year. So it's going to fluctuate as volatilely, I don't think that's the word, as capital is. So if you see $5 million in capital, if a large proportion of that is gas tax funded, you'll see that in the capital grants. And lastly, we've got increased investment income, partly from increased portfolio management and partly from growing reserves. And per the sustainable infrastructure recommendations, we've earmarked that to close the infrastructure funding gap, so that's going to our transfer to reserves. Thank you.
Sorry for all the questions. And as far as probability, I mean, how confident are you in these numbers? Are these conservative numbers, and what's your confidence level in them?
Thank you, through the chair. That's an excellent question. Staff aim not to be conservative or optimistic. We aim as much as possible just to be accurate. In terms of what's our confidence in the numbers, as confident as we can be per every item. So every item is going to, so the 1% revenues, I'm very confident in. The building permit revenues, I'm not so confident in. We only have macroeconomic data to look at. We only have historical trends to look at. It's probably going to be different, but that's the best we can do with some revenues. So that's a good segue actually to core department user fees. And you'll notice when we go through the core operating budgets, some of them are funded by user fees. Building permits is a prime example. We fund the activities of our building permit staff by the fees that we charge for those. Some years we get way more fees than what the cost of the staff is. Some years we get less. Nevertheless, that's the idea of a user fee. And so we are predicting an increase in user fee revenue across the board of about $59,000. So that takes a little bit of a pressure off of what would otherwise be tax-funded core services.
With building permit revenues, when a very large building permit fee is paid by one of the large buildings such as Ani, a portion of that is for the inspection. And if there were a sudden downturn in the economy, we would suffer a loss of revenue, but we would still have to carry on and do the inspections. Do we carry that inspection, that portion over to the next year if the actual inspection work is going to carry over to the next year?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So a couple things. The simple answer is yes. So for instance, we received a lot of building permit revenue at the end of December 2018 for work that we know is going to be conducted in 2019. So our accounting department will defer that to 2019 when the work actually occurs. So that's an accounting concept. We don't recognize the revenue until we've earned it. We also recognize that some of the work leading up to the permits being issued is work, so we'll recognize a portion of the revenue accordingly. The second part of your question, which I think is important to note, is these last couple of years we've forecasted significant building permit revenues, and that exceeds what the core budget for building permits are. So if all of a sudden a lot of that revenue dries up, how are we going to pay for that? Are we going to have to see a large tax increase? And the answer is no. We've proactively taken about $300,000 of the forecasted revenue and put that in a reserve. So if building permit revenues dry up, we simply reduce that transfer to reserve. There's no tax impact. So we've taken some proactive measures again to promote tax increase stability.
Thank you. Excellent.
So just wanted to note some of the core budget savings that staff were able to achieve this year through efforts. This year, the city participated in a joint RFP with many municipalities, and the fire dispatch costs resulting in a $65,000 savings. This year, we were able to secure a very good lease on our printers. So we got new printers this year, and you'll hear about that in the IT core budget. And that was $10,000 less than what we had budgeted for, so that's been reduced from the IT department budget. Our professional purchaser started in August of this year, and she's been working very diligently on a number of our contracts, one of them being office supplies. She's secured a contract for about 30% savings in our office supplies, and this year that amounts to about $15,000. Our work safe premiums have been steadily declining since 2016, since our occupational health and safety advisor was hired. And to date, we've saved almost $100,000 in premiums as a result of reduced workplace incidents. So something we can celebrate, not just the dollars involved, but the reduced in workplace injuries. It's very significant. And these savings will continue on into perpetuity, right? So overall, it's something around $60,000 less per year that we're paying in premiums. Every year we'll have the benefit of those savings because of her efforts. So I just wanted to highlight some of the successes.
Just a comment, Mr. CFO, this is good CFO stuff. I like this. And this is exactly what I was talking about in the beginning when I said that we should be looking at a cost realignment initiatives, and I was aware of these 4 items that were initiated by the city, by the staff, and I think it's phenomenal. And having worked for federal government before, I know there's other things, and they're the things that, you know, to us, that when we communicate to the citizens that, hey, yeah, we did look at ourselves, we did examine ourselves, you know, and it's a lot easier to sort of say, okay, now we've got down to the bare bones and we know we're lean and mean, and it's a lot easier to justify, you know, for this extra service, this is going to cost you this much. So, and until you've gone through this exercise and communicated this, you know, I can't stress the importance of this. Okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Kobayashi. And I would echo that. I think it's incumbent on staff to re-examine how they're delivering a service and ensure that they're delivering that in the most cost-effective way. And so credit to the fire chief for participating, for instance, in that fire dispatch RFP this year. So I fully support efforts to re-examine how we're delivering the service. One distinction I will make, though, is if it means service cuts, that's a decision of council. If it means providing the same service, finding ways to deliver it as cost effectively we can, that is something staff should be doing. And so I absolutely support those efforts. So last year we transformed our budget process so that we deliver it to the public and to council from a service level perspective. And the work that the Director of Engineering is doing in Parks, for instance, demonstrates the effort, the progress. It's not perfect, but we need to be able to communicate to our citizens exactly what they're getting for their taxes, and that's what we're trying to do. So this budget is a service level budget. It's depicted in a way where you're helped to understand the services that you're getting for it. However, you may ask yourself, what is driving the increases to those services? So the finance staff have taken time to report what we call cost object. So for every single service, you're usually going to have a salaries component to it. You're usually going to have a materials component, a benefits component, a contracted services component. Are we keeping those cost object as a whole under control? And I would say yes, but I'll let you arrive at your own conclusion. Our salaries across the board are increasing by 2.34%. Okay? There's no increase to our FTEs. So if we want to increase our staff complement, that's something we need to get a buy-in from council before doing that. And we will commit to doing that. We're not going to increase our FTEs without getting approval from council. Our benefits took a hit this year. Our employer health tax is $135,000. Other benefits, so this would just include the savings that we got from WorkSafe BC, are only going up by 0.32%. So when you read the financial plan document, you'll notice overall benefit costs going up about 10.48%. Almost all of it is due to employer health tax. Now keep in mind, this year we are paying MSP premiums as well as the employer health tax. Next year the MSP premiums will disappear. So really the incremental difference that we're paying in the employer health tax is around $79,000. So that's, earlier on, I said that was about a 0.5% tax increase. That was 0.5% of a tax increase to pay for the employer health tax. Our contracted services are as follows. RCMP up about $91,000. That's plus 3.2%. West Shore Parks and Rec up 2%. And one thing I'll note for the new members of council and for the keen members in the public, our West Shore Parks and Rec requisition probably will be less than what we've budgeted for. And we took that deliberate approach last year, recognizing that at some point we think this requisition has to go up to continue to pay for the current services. But without having the consensus from the owner, the other municipalities, we can't increase that requisition. So we've taken proactive steps. We've increased funding for it, and we've taken, if there's any surplus created from that, we're putting it into a reserve. So if 2 years from now we get consensus and there's a 6% increase to our acquisition, we can phase that in because we've got this reserve that we've created. Again, tax stability with a focus on tax stability, tax increase stability. So it is within council's purview if you want. We could reduce the funding to what we actually expect the requisition to be. Not recommended by staff, but absolutely an option. Library, additional $14,000. We're going to hear from them tomorrow. Pardon me, on Wednesday, in our next meeting. And other contracted services, we've actually reduced by 2.15%. A lot of that is due to the fire dispatch savings as well. So it sort of paints an overall picture of
Councillor Day.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Just a quick question, because I didn't see it anywhere else in the budget. I thought it might be included in the other. Are legal services included in the other budget?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Day. Our legal is in contracted services, yes, in the other line, yeah. Our materials and supplies, so this year we were able to reduce our budget because we're not having an election this year, knock on wood. And so we took that out of the budget. That'll reappear in 2022 or 2021. I'm not good at math. That's a joke. It's a joke. So we've saved almost $30,000 in election supplies this year, as well as those office supply savings that we mentioned earlier. So overall, we're only seeing a 1% increase in supplies. This would include materials used by our Public Works Department for the work that they do as well, and parks. Our transfer to reserve budget has gone up by $140,000. That's approximately a 1% tax increase from the previous year, so that's in line with the sustainable infrastructure recommendation. And then there's other transfers of reserves, which we simply apply an inflationary factor to continue to grow, and that amounts to $58,600. So today, in terms of special projects, I'd like to define what I mean by special projects to the member of the public. We can essentially break out our expenditures into two broad categories. You have core and you have projects. Okay, core is every single year, this is what it's going to cost to run the operating department. Project should be one time. So special projects are really operating, so they're not capital, they're not tangible stuff like a new road, but they're a project, and they should only be one time. They are funded by accumulated surplus. So that means if we have earned a surplus, we're not allowed to budget for a surplus, so it's always an unintentional surplus. If we've earned a surplus over the years, maybe there's been a staff vacancy, maybe we've identified some savings in that year, it goes into this reserve account called the accumulated surplus. So it's not a sustainable funding source, it's just a pot that exists there that has a finite amount to it. So we can use that to fund these volatile expenses we call special projects. Well, we need to fund core operating with taxation because that is a sustainable infrastructure. Pardon me. That's a sustainable revenue source. We're going to tax every single year, so we can use that to fund operating expenditures that we experience every year. So we fund our special projects by accumulated surplus normally. And what we do as staff, there's normally a little bit of a disconnect. We front load the expenditures in the financial plan bylaw. So you see this year we got $1.3 million budgeted for special projects. That's not because we actually expect to spend $1.3 million this year. That's because it provides us, staff, with maximum operational flexibility. So, for instance, we've planned to work on the transportation master plan starting in 2020, but maybe there's some sort of advantage to starting this year that we're not aware of now, but we'll be aware of in 5 years, or pardon me, in 5 months. You've provided us with the legal authority to start spending rather than coming back with a financial plan amendment. So what we did in this year's budget was we listed the special projects for the first 3 years, but next to it we actually wrote when we expect to actually conduct that work. So there's not a disconnect between how much we funded in each year and when we actually expect to get the work done. We can shift that around if council's uncomfortable with that. If we really, so for instance, I can move the transportation master plan in the budget to the 2020 column, but just be aware if there's some advantage for us to starting that this year, I'd have to come back to council with a financial plan amendment. So over the 3 years, we have $1.6 million budgeted. But please keep in mind, $500,000 of that is the affordable housing reserve contribution. I'm going to talk a bit more about that later in the first core budget. So let's save the discussion about that until then. But if you take that out of consideration and the contingency special projects, we're really left with $912,000, over 3 years. That's approximately $300,000. And that's a reasonable special project budget. That's a typical historical special project budget. It's also within range of what our historical surpluses have been, so it can be funded somewhat sustainably. It's just hard to predict because we're not budgeting for a surplus. Okay. Did I have yes, thank you.
Can the accumulated surplus also be, is it specifically for the special projects and you cannot, I just want to make sure I'm clear, so you cannot put it into like your asset management?
Thank you, Councillor Kobayashi. No, you can use it to fund capital if that's what you're asking. What you can't use it to do is fund sustainable infrastructure annually because it's just a one-time pot that's sitting there. So it's not something that I could take $5 million and put it in our capital reserves, no problem, but there's no more going into those reserves. To fund the ongoing capital, you need an annual amount, and that's what your annual transfer to reserve is. Okay. If there's some questions from the public about the consolidated data that I've just put up, I'd welcome those. Otherwise, I'll set up the first core budget. Okay, this year we're going to try to put the respective budget on the screen so that both council and the public can follow along rather than flipping through the 200 pages. But bear with us, it's not perfect. So corporate administration, what we call corporate administration in our budget is it's a broad budget. It includes HR, it includes our legal costs, it includes communication. Corporate administration council and also our grant and aid. Overall, we're projecting a 1.5% increase. There's an 8.5% increase forecast to council and committee, and that's primarily due to the elimination of the 1/3 tax allowance for council remuneration that was approved last year. There is an 11.6% increase projected for our grant and aid and fee for service per our most recent grant and aid request meeting. So some of the things that the Corporate Administration Department was up to in previous years, they conducted their election, they issued their records management RFP, negotiated a collective agreement that runs to the end of 2019, replaced the furniture in the council chamber, hired an HR manager, and there's many communication, I think our communication manager is being a bit shy here, but there's many communication accomplishments through the year, including the Financial Plan Award and also the Annual Report Award, which she won. So I just want to take a quick moment to discuss some of the special projects related to corporate administration. Scroll down a little bit here. So here we have a summary of all the special projects that are being proposed. The first is affordable housing contribution. Now, there's no resolution on record of council expecting to provide an affordable housing contribution in 2019. However, staff are recommending that we establish this budget so that if the council should wish at some point during the year to provide a contribution for an affordable housing project, we can do that without amending the budget.
The affordable housing contribution, is that just a pot of money that comes from new development? There's a per lot charge or per unit charge that's built up?
Yeah, precisely. We collect affordable housing contribution from new developments. We put it into a reserve, and then council can use that reserve as they wish to support affordable housing contribution or projects.
So there's a finite number in that budget, and what you're saying of the amount that's in that budget, whatever it may be, 500,000 is sort of pre-approved, I guess we could call it, if we want to spend it on.
Yeah.
But what would that total budget be? What would the total amount be?
Well, there is approximately $550,000 projected at the end of 2018 in the affordable housing contribution. So staff just put a number that was close to the total amount. Just gives council the maximum flexibility to spend from that reserve during the year. Doesn't necessarily mean that council wants to spend from that reserve during the year.
Right. Okay. But we couldn't spend that money on anything else?
No. Yeah, it's for affordable housing.
And it doesn't come, none of it comes from general taxation?
Correct.
Thank you.
Yes. And
question on
yes,
the space planning budget.
Yep.
That doesn't mean we're extending our planning authority out into space, I know, but is that sort of architectural space planning where we determine all of the space that we need and their interrelationship, something that would be useful both in this building and in a future building?
Yes, and thank you. And it's a good question. The reason it's put into 2021 is because staff don't see really an immediate exercise that would be conducted, but it was essentially put together with the idea in mind that we might relocate. Our OCP recommends that we may relocate to Royal Bay. There's some options that the CAO has pursued in the past. And so if that were to happen, we would need to do some space planning to ensure we have adequate space for a growing workforce.
Excellent. Thank you.
It's a question from Councillor Day.
Councillor Day.
Sorry, I just lost you on that space plan. Oh, there we go. City Hall space planning. Now I see it. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. I just couldn't find it.
Thank you. Just a final comment on the affordable housing contribution budget. Staff would not spend this without council resolution supporting it. So if you were to approve the budget for that, rest assured that we would come to council before spending it at any point. The city is expecting to conduct a citizen survey, which happens every couple of years, led by our communications department. That's $10,000 in 2019. We've established a corporate contingency budget. Again, it's very similar to the affordable housing contribution, except for it would be spent only in extraordinary circumstances, either legal or personnel issues. It would not be spent without council resolution supporting it, and normally that would be in camera. So again, it just provides maximum flexibility in case we need it. Staff aren't anticipating the use of it, especially on a regular basis. Same would go for the First Nations outreach budget. It's a contingency budget, essentially, that is established if, in case some Indigenous remains are found and need to be moved. We've got a contingency budget so that we can go and spend the money if we need to. Not funded by taxation and not used without council resolution. Not really projects, but in the budget nonetheless. Well, okay. The HR department has put in a supplementary request for performance development. You may recall that the city recruited and hired an HR manager about halfway through last year. One of the initiatives that she's working on is performance development, which would support our internal staff in achieving professional development. Lastly, we've got waterfront signs and branding special project. This is a carry forward from last year. It was approved, expecting to be spent in the 2018 year by the communications department. So we've carried that forward because spending hasn't occurred, and it's essentially to brand the city and provide and install interpretive signs throughout the community. So that will conclude my presentation for corporate administration. Invite any questions, comments?
Just on the waterfront signs and branding was last year's project. Money wasn't spent. So that was a surplus money that was then moved, and it's being, I guess, taxed again for this year, the $9,500.
Through the chair. No, so these are not taxed for. They're accumulated funds that have been set aside in the reserve. So it's essentially, we didn't take money out of reserve to spend on it. We just kept it in the reserve.
Councillor Kobayashi?
Just through the chair, how long are we allowed to keep this in the reserve? Like, can we just, is it additive all throughout the years, or do we have to spend it? Is there a time limit that we have to spend this?
The answer to that question depends on the nature of the reserve. As far as special project goes, we can carry, if we don't spend it, we can carry forward it forever, so long as we have an accumulated surplus that can still fund it. Okay, there's some. I don't want to get too complicated. There's some reserves that have a time limited nature to them, but this is not one of them. Seeing no questions, we're going to move on to the finance department budget.
Yeah, maybe go back to staffing for a second. I'll just take a moment to comment on the staffing changes of the finance department. As our finance director mentioned earlier tonight, in 2018 we did create a new purchasing accounting technician position out of an existing vacant position. And late 2018, what's displayed as a change for 2019 here, we saw a restructuring of our front counter services. So this service was previously provided under corporate administration. It is now transitioned over to the responsibility of the finance department, and that resulted in a transfer of 2 FTEs over and some casual funding there as well. So that summarizes the changes there that we're seeing with our staffing. And so just to touch on a couple of the performance measures we have already highlighted tonight, our change in our interest earnings or our investment returns, these have more than doubled over last year, primarily a result of more active portfolio management, taking better advantage of some of the investment opportunities out there. And as we've mentioned at previous committee meetings, this increase in investment earnings will be used to help fund the sustainable infrastructure. Looking at our operating budget, there's nominal funding here highlighted, and we're not really expecting a real change over last year. So the school tax admin fee, this is a legislated fee that we collect. It's equal to about $2,000 plus 0.1% of the school taxation that we collect on behalf of the province. We have a miscellaneous fees and charges bylaw that enables us to collect a fee on any requests for property tax information. So we typically receive those from realtors, from lawyers. And it also enables us to collect a interest charge of 1% per month on any overdue accounts receivable. And that's what you see there is the nominal other revenue. Looking at our operating expenses budget, in general, this budget is almost entirely comprised of the staffing costs of our department. And so the increase there, again, is primarily related to the introduction of the employer health tax premium, as well as contracted staffing increases. And just to comment on the preliminary 2018 actuals compared to budget, we have come in at approximately 95% of budget, and this is directly related to the vacancy of our purchasing position. We didn't fill that position until August of last year. So we have touched on a couple of our accomplishments, both the award for the financial plan as well as the award for our 2017 annual report. That was definitely a massive collaborative effort across departments. We also saw the introduction of a real shift in this document here that we're looking at into a more service-oriented, detailed budget, as well as the preparation of the 50-year Sustainable Infrastructure Replacement Plan that we presented last month. And moving forward to this year, we do anticipate rewriting our reserve bylaw, as well working with the engineering department to renew the development cost charge bylaw, and just continuing to improve on operational efficiencies. And I will pause if there's any questions at all from the public or from committee.
Your Worship.
Thank you. On the previous slide, you had where you basically work out the total tax impact by average residential taxpayer of $2.71. How's that calculated by household? Is it 2.1, or is it like what's that number based on? Because obviously we have a certain number of taxpayers, and I'm assuming you're going to go with anybody who's over the age of 19. So I'm trying to figure out where that number actually sits when you talk about an actual resident householder owner.
Thank you for mentioning that. To clarify, that number is per residence.
So it's per residence, not per
not
taxpayer.
Per taxpayer.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Martin. It's the average assessed value for a residential property. So it's a household, yeah. Thank you. We'll move on to the IT department operating budget. Just give a little bit of a history of how our IT department came to be, because it is rather recent. Previously, we contracted with the City of Langford to manage our IT network and services, help desk, et cetera, and it was a stinking good deal, but we found that we wanted to be sort of the masters of our own future, and that really that really required for us to migrate away from them. Our priorities, Martin Langford's priorities, understandably so. They're not really a private sector contractor, so they weren't making our priorities their priorities. So we decided to establish our own IT department. There was a 1-year clause. We're actually still under contract until April this year. So we initiated that last year after council discussion. We established what we believe to be was a model in the region for a municipality of our size of a 2 FTE department. That's based on a couple municipalities. But we recognize that maybe there's an ability to keep the cost low by contracting part of that. And that's what we've done. We've got one IT supervisor, and his work is complemented by contracted help desk services. So what we see is our IT supervisor provides a lot of the back end, the building of the network, the maintaining, the security, and then the help desk requests, the password resets, the how do I open Word documents sort of requests go to our contracted services. So we've maintained funding for 2 FTEs, but right now we still are making use of contracted services just to be as cost effective as we can. Mind you, given that we returned a significant surplus from this department last year, we didn't feel it was appropriate to raise to increase the budget for the department. So you'll see that there's actually just a small decrease of -2% for this department. Council may recall that recently we discussed use of the surplus that's generated from this department to help fund some of the PC replacement. So that help funds the replacement of some of our equipment and make sure we have a sustainable balance to begin with. So we've got some accomplishments to detail for you. Early on in the year, the IT department conducted the email migration, and that was a total of 1.2 million email items, and they all came through, nothing corrupted. And he did that himself. We paid him a bit of overtime, but it saved us upwards of $20,000, what we had projected to be part of the special project to pay a contractor to do it. There was some interruption in email service. I don't deny that. Mayor Martin knows that. However, the data that was preserved and the fact that there was zero corruption was a significant achievement. Later on in the year, close to November, we conducted the domain separation. So this was really the network, our network. We have all of our servers in-house. It's no longer trafficked through Langford in any way. And that was very successful. All the corporate printers were replaced. We got a stinking good deal for the leases, and which is why we're able to reduce the lease budget by that significant amount. Moving on to what we expect to be working on in 2019, we would like to establish good remote VPN services. Having trouble reading my writing. We want to conduct a security audit. So that's your special project budget for 2019 in the amount of $30,000. Last year we had established this budget in the 2018 plan, but for 2019 to the tune of $20,000. We've added $10,000 with the intention of conducting social engineering services. So the $20,000 pays for network penetration testing. Simply put, let's just try to hack the network. The social engineering is really the people side of the equation. And there have been successful social engineering attempts on the city of Colwood, luckily with not severe consequences, and that's experienced everywhere. I'm sure every organization you've got individuals who have clicked a link that they shouldn't have clicked, and if you've got a robust network system like we have, the virus is contained, and that happened. So what we want to embark on is really an education campaign with staff to help them realize that if that we're the best defense really against network penetration. That concludes my presentation for IT department. Questions? Yes, sir.
How do you evaluate when to lease and when to buy?
That's an excellent question. So we do a return on investment calculation. We can go out and get quotes without having to issue a competitive process and determine what's the capital cost. And we can simply annualize that over the expected useful life of that. We've got some good data to support how long we can expect to be using our printers, because the printers that we had previous to that, they were quite old. So we had a good idea of how long we could stretch out the purchase of it. Frankly, the lease that we got is essentially capital lease terms with a rental terms in there as well. Capital lease price with a rental term. Capital lease ensures that the city commits to that contract long term. Rental allows us to opt out of that. So we've got that flexibility in the contract, but we've got the capital lease price. So it's a good deal. It protects the city against being able to change our mind if we get poor service, but we also get the really good price of what the capital lease is. So to answer your question, we do that ROI calculation, we compare it to what the lease price is, and we determine what's the best course of action.
Looking at your plans for 2019, or I guess it's not your plans, but it's the tech IT's, preparing a robust disaster recovery plan and IT strategy and configure a disaster recovery site. Where does that fit in from a cost standpoint? When we're looking at IT general, like I'm assuming that's got wages and stuff built into that. So how would I tell how much we're actually planning on budgeting for a disaster recovery plan, and also what the cost is that we're budgeting for to configure a disaster recovery site?
Thank you, Your Worship. So that we're not proposing a special project budget for those activities. What we're saying is that that's an essential piece of an IT operating budget as well. We could give you an idea if you cared how much time it would take for us to prepare that plan. But what we're saying is really we should be doing that no matter what. And so it's included in the operating budget expenditure.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, one thing I just wanted to mention to council and the public in case it comes up. You'll notice throughout the budget document, we've got our schedule of FTEs per department. And if you look closely, you notice there's been a lot of restructuring from last year. Deputy Director Hepting mentioned how some staff have come over from corporate administration. There's also been staff moved throughout the city. So what we've done is we have restated 2018 budgets and 2018 year-to-dates as if those restructurings had occurred in 2018. That gives us the ability to compare the incremental increase apples to apples. Otherwise, you would see a 40% increase with this one operating budget and a 40% decrease with another operating budget. So in case anyone's comparing to our 2018 financial plan online, you'll notice that. Finance department was only $700,000 last year. It's $900,000 this year. So we thought that was the fairest way to demonstrate the incremental increase that the budget is forecasting. Next up is fire department. Thank you. There it is. Oh, there it is.
So just to comment on staffing of the fire department briefly. So the department is comprised of 8 career firefighters, 2 administrative professionals, and approximately 32 volunteer firefighters. So in terms of the staffing composition for 2019 over 2018, we're not seeing any changes other than that of the volunteer firefighters. They tend to fluctuate year to year, and the department is currently undergoing the recruitment process right now. So just to touch on a couple of the activity level performance measures that are highlighted here, the training hours, those are directly tied to the volunteer program, so they tend to fluctuate as with the number of volunteer firefighters. Now the emergency incident response time, that is stated there. So since 2017, the fire department has been tracking their response time, and the National Fire Protection Association has a standard of 10 minutes or less for volunteer fire departments in suburban areas, of which Colwood is. And Colwood has improved its incident response time over the last year and currently meets this standard on 89% of incidents. So that's certainly something worth mentioning. Moving over to the department's operating budget, overall we are proposing a 1.1% or approximately $23,000 increase in the core operating budget. Again, this is primarily tied to contracted staffing salary increases as well as the employer health tax, but that increase has been mitigated by the savings that we're experiencing under the transition of the dispatch contract to the City of Surrey. And we've highlighted that as well in the financial plan. And so just moving over to comment on a couple of the accomplishments from this past year for the department. So the department developed and implemented a refreshed mid-rise building deployment strategy. And as the fire chief explained this to me, so basically what they mean by this statement is we upgraded the hose that is used that allows for an increased water flow that requires less people to operate the hose. Another accomplishment to note is that both fire engines have been outfitted with electric combination tools, also known as like a mini jaws of life, which just gives the department that much more depth on being able to respond to incidents. And to comment on the plans for 2019, the city did issue a request for proposal with respect to the replacement of fire truck number 51, which is a 1994 diesel pumper truck. And responses have been received and evaluated, and a report will be coming forward to council later this month on that one. And happy to pause for any questions or comments with respect to the fire.
Question? Through the chair.
Oh, sorry.
Through the chair. You know, these measurements that you've set up this year are substantially way better than last year. Unbelievable for every one of the departments. Come a long ways, and I'm really proud of you guys for doing this. It's a great thing. The only thing that I don't understand is that it would help me because I love promoting people in the city, right? So I really do. But some of the numbers don't tell me how good it really is. Like, for example, and maybe the fire chief may want to comment on this, like the emergency incident response time, NFPA, 89% last year. Is that like outstanding, or is it not so good? Or so, the old coloring system, the green, yellow, red, so that you can brag about it, right? So I don't know, and that's the context I'm missing in a lot of these measurements, unfortunately, right now. Like, you could look at, for example, even if someone was to look at your interest rates that we got on our money, for example, invested, you go, oh, but then it's still double what we had the year before, which is phenomenal, and you have to put it in low risk, and you got to preserve your capital, and I understand how you have to invest as a city. So, but it's that context that we're missing. Like, is this incredible? Is this something I want to brag about? Because I want to brag about things. And so, no, you really do. You want to brag about things for your city. And to have those type of stats and just that context it's just a generic comment right through. So I don't want a specific answer or anything here, but it's something that I'm seeing right now, that it's in almost every one of the measurements, but substantially better than what we had last year. Way better. I really like what you've done.
Specific to the fire budget, and I notice it's not included in, the acquisition of the new pumper truck is not included. Can you explain how is that going to miraculously appear?
So I'll just pull it back up. Right here, what we're highlighting is the core operating budget. And we're also commenting on any special projects, which are one-time operating items. You'll see the miraculous appearance of the fire truck replacement when we get to the capital budget review on the 19th.
If I just may add also, Mr. Chair, that capital project is actually something that's going to require early budget approval. We've gone out to competition. The results of those competitions are going to be brought forward to council next Monday.
Your Worship.
Thank you. Sorry, can I just clarify too, the emergency incidents response time, the 1720, is that how many response times there were? Like, what's that number?
Yes.
And while you're about to do that, because I wanted to get you up as well, do you have, Fire Chief, do you have any numbers on the amount of volunteer hours that were spent with the fire department last year?
Through the chair, the training hours, the hours that the volunteers put in training is part of the annual training, annual report.
Sorry, I meant more on calls.
For calls?
Yeah,
How many
like
hours they've put on calls?
Yeah.
That I don't have in front of me. We certainly could extrapolate that out of our data management system, as we track every firefighter, every call duration. So we can definitely put that before council if you'd like, or committee if you'd like. So. Specifically, talking to the NFPA standard 1720, so that's the standard for, even though we're a combination fire department, we are still classed as suburban because of our population size. So we would fall under the standard 1720. That standard indicates a response time from time of page till time of door for 10 minutes or less, 80% of the time. So that is the performance matrix. In 2017, I did implement a program where we would not be holding a fire truck to fill a fourth or fifth or sixth seat. Primarily, most of our calls are during the day, and that is when our volunteers are less available to respond because they're all at work. So that's why we run all of our staff during the day. So by not waiting an extra 30 seconds or 40 seconds to see if we get a volunteer driving into the station, staff on shift, they mount the engine and off they go. They do not stop and wait. So we started that in 2017. There was a little bit of a learning curve. Also we're still hampered a little bit because we don't run a nighttime shift or a nighttime staffing at the hall. There's nobody on shift at night. We're still waiting for the volunteers to show up from their personal home to the station, get their gear on, get into the engines, and then respond from there. We've been working on it as a team, and you can see the statistical increase to 89%, so we're definitely hitting our performance matrix. I am confident that with a little bit more work internally and with the buy-in, full buy-in by all the volunteers, that we can actually move forward and try and see if we can do better on that matrix in 19. Okay. Is there any other questions? Nope, seeing that.
Right.
There you go.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We'll move on to the policing budget now. Before we get too excited, I should mention more information about the policing budget is forthcoming to council. Okay, what we have here is really a status quo budget, but the RCMP has conducted a GDSAC report, which is General Duties. Thank you very much, Councillor Day, which demonstrates to the municipalities that are our partners in that detachment what the detachment size should be. I've been given a sneak preview. My lips are sealed until council, all of council, and all of the other councils get an opportunity to take a look at that. Should that recommend a staffing increase, I'll be prepared with a funding strategy. Okay, so what we have right now is a status quo budget of 16.6 FTEs. I call them FTEs. That's the strength size that Colwood pays for. We're looking at a 3.4% increase to the contracted policing services. Most of that is labor. Keep in mind the labor increase for the policing was above what our collective agreement increase was for our internal staff. And also there's increments that police officers earn while on the job. So they might jump 5% as a result of an increment or a promotion, as well as the regular increase. So we're looking at a 3.4% increase. That includes provision for potential retro that's on the way. The RCMP has gone into good habit of providing us with expectations of what that retro is going to be so that there's no surprise the following year. So the way that we work with our partnering municipality is a work in progress. And the finance department, the administration here has heard loud and clear from this council that this council needs to be provided with a longer term plan for how we conduct policing service in the region, and particularly how we manage the building. So we'll discuss the building capital during the capital discussions later on in the month. But I just wanted to mention it as an accomplishment. We've got a new officer in charge of that detachment who's intent on working with all the partners. And I believe that this year we've developed a much longer term capital program, but there's work to be done, and we recognize that. That concludes my presentation for policing at this time. Like I said, stay tuned. I believe the officer in charge of the detachment is looking to set up a meeting, a joint municipal meeting near the end of this month. So keep your eyes out for that invitation.
No questions? Right. And so we're moving on to building and bylaw, right?
I believe this is the last departmental service budget review that we have scheduled for tonight. So just a quick comment on the staffing composition. We're not expecting any changes there over what we had with 2018 for the building and bylaw department. So we've commented on this briefly earlier tonight. So new construction tax revenue. Again, this is in part earmarked to the incremental costs related to that new construction, increased life cycle costs for the incremental infrastructure there. And I did speak with our building and bylaw manager briefly, and we are intending moving forward in 2019 to better track the turnaround time with our building and our plumbing permits. And we are aiming to turn those permits around building within 5 business days, 90% of the time. And the manager did acknowledge that this will become much easier to do so under the introduction of new land development software that we'll be talking about when we review the capital budget. And so just moving down to the building and bylaw operating budget. When we look at the funding or the fees, as the finance director mentioned earlier tonight, this is an area where it is a real estimate. So we are estimating activity somewhat consistent with the heightened building activity that we experienced in 2018. A large portion of this, approximately $300,000, is considered in the financial plan to be transferred over to reserves. So as our finance director said, should the building development activity slow down, we won't see an increase on our property tax revenue to the extent that we've been transferring to reserves. And looking at the operating expenses associated with this department, we're seeing a nominal increase.
Councillor Parkinson, sorry.
Just, sorry, on there, the new construction tax revenue, where you're predicting 361,000, is that the same as the new construction property taxes in the consolidated budget where you're predicting 200,000?
I figured you would catch me on that one, Councillor Parkinson. Thank you for your attention to detail. Yes, that reflects projections that were prepared earlier on. But as I mentioned, we'll know the final number come March 15th when we get it. So I apologize for the discrepancy.
No big deal. No.
Thank you. Sorry, so just to comment on the operating expenses budget increase. Again, that's tied with the health tax and the contracted salary increases. When we look at the operating expenses, the 2018 preliminary actuals to the budget, we did have vacancies with both our bylaw and our building inspection divisions, and that has contributed to coming in under budget there.
Councillor Day and then Councillor Kobayashi.
Thanks. Just looking at the full-time equivalents on page 168, it seems like 2019 is forecasting the same as 2018, and I think we've already had a motion to have at least one FTE less that I can think of off the top of my head.
That's not what I understand. I understand that we were keeping the FTEs at status quo.
Okay, I'm confused.
My recollection is that we voted to hire for an unoccupied FTE, as I recall, a couple of meetings ago. Yeah, for another bylaw officer.
Okay.
And it was the senior bylaw officer one that had been migrated into the manager's position in that mix somehow. That's what I recall.
Councillor Hawkeye Parkinson.
I think we were presented with a report with a second bylaw officer, and it was said we would think about that and make the final decision at budget time. So I don't think it's been finalized yet.
No, it hasn't. But the FT allotment was 3 bylaw officers. Yeah, I mean, we were 3 a year ago, and 1 has gone vacant for a number of time.
Oh, corporate officer.
Just for clarification, there was a report presented, and council resolved to maintain the 2 bylaw enforcement officers. I think perhaps what you're referring to is there used to be 3, and from 2017 to 2018 it was brought down to 2, but the second position hasn't been filled. And so the report came back with an update, and council resolved to maintain it at 2.
Till we got to the budget. Yeah, sure, all right. Shall we sing Kumbaya?
Sorry, can you use the mics?
Sorry.
Oh,
no, I
didn't
just
hear
think,
what you said.
I think that the last discussion was, yes, it looks like a good idea, and we'll finalize it when we finalize the budget. So.
Okay. Everybody satisfied with that, Councillor Kobayashi?
Just through the chair, just a quick question here. Just on the business licenses, what you're talking about is that the $100 business license, with the one-time charge that we charge every business?
Correct.
Okay, so with this number is a renewed number every year, so you're assuming there's 80 new businesses for 2019, correct? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Are we finished that section?
We are. That concludes the presentations of the service budgets that were listed on tonight's agenda.
Final chance for questions to the public. Any questions on the budget presentation?
Rick McKay, 3309 Crowhurst Place. I came in a little late in the meeting, so I didn't catch the flavor of everything. But there was a couple of 2 or 3 comments I'd like to add to it. Lagoon Road and Hockering, I agree with Councillor Kobayashi. It's balkanized, and that is a heavily used pedestrian walkway down Lagoon Road, and it is a very busy road, and a lot of speeding goes down there. I'm talking excessive, because I live on that area. And there's a lot of school kids that go down there in classes that that go down the road like troopers. And because it's balkanized, there's no walkway from Heatherbell to Goldfinch. There's nothing. So these troop of kids go down there with their teachers and whatever, and they walk on the left-hand side going down, and you got a goat trail, especially on that slope. It's not much. That's it. There's nothing. So we're going to have a road, we're going to have a sidewalk to nowhere going up Lagoon from Hockering. So what? Goes into a ditch. So is there a plan? I mean, I know that Two Waters, is that part of their plan to put sidewalks along there? I don't know. Secondly, it's got to decide which side are we going to have the sidewalks on, because if you're going to have kids and everything going from one side, then to the next, and as they're going down Lagoon, that's kind of not too good. So it's either going to decide which way you're going to build a proper sidewalk, and I agree with Councillor Baxter that it's heavily used, so we're going to have some separation. I don't know. But anyway, that's the point I'd like to make, that if anywhere there's going to be sidewalks, I think that's imperative at Lagoon Road, because that's a heavily used area. And it's not only kids, it's a lot of it. We walk down there, lots of people. It's amazing how many people walk down Lagoon Road. Secondly, talking about the parks budget, I'm looking at what was presented and these numbers that were thrown on there. So I don't know if it's a scientific wild-ass guess or whatever, but is that a form of zero-based budget? The numbers that are being put there, I guess I'm kind of grappling with the fact that all these years there's nothing ever being put, there's been no proper budgeting of what's being allotted to cost centers. I'm used to zero-based budgets. When you go in, you don't know, put a zero-based budget and you go from there. So I'm assuming that's the first cut at a zero-based budget. Am I correct?
I can answer that. Yes, we zero-based budget all of our salaries and benefits, but if the FTEs haven't been defined, as is in the case of the Public Works Department, we've just got a salaries budget and we've added a collective agreement increase to it. Once it's defined and we know we need, I don't know, 25, 26 FTEs, whatever goes in there, we zero base it. So especially with the departments that have been presented today, you note that there's specific positions listed, and so we've zero-based all of our salaries and benefits for each and every one of those.
So by the time you start getting a database in there and you start filing with your timesheets and everything coming in there in 10 months' time, whatever, you're going to start receiving data to see actually what's coming down the pike. So better budgeting, I would assume. Perfect. Okay, and the last thing is I sit in the audience here, and it's the committee of the whole, and I'm as used to the committees we used to have. I find it a little frustrating, because all I can do is shoot my gums off here, beginning and the end, and all I have is blank faces in front of me. I'm used to, backward, forward, sideways, getting in there and talking about things. Is there a better format? I'd love it, because that's what I'm used to.
Mr. McKay, we are trying to get away from completely blank faces, which is why you got a response from the Chief Financial Officer. And I'd like to talk to the issue of which side the sidewalk should go on a road like that, both sides. That's my opinion.
Yeah, but I like to say we're having this dialogue. I like to have dialogue coming back and forth, because if there's a plan, tell me. So that we move on. We're moving forward. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Jensen.
It just struck me, and I made a note here, if I might ask a question of staff, Mr. Chair, that on the revenue screen there, have you lumped in the traffic fine revenue into somewhere in there? Other or?
Yes, that's operating grants.
Right, so I think we're done with financial plan. Thank you for excellent presentation and a wonderful plan. Look forward to talking about the rest of it. Yeah. Wednesday, the next installment. So, I think we're at, I just have to announce the next meeting is Wednesday, which the mayor just announced. Thank you. You moved adjournment? We are adjourned. Thank you all for coming and staying awake. That's wonderful. Oh, all in favor of adjourning? Yeah.